Feel free to find an opportunity to do an audio check. But with that, because it's now 2 o'clock, we'll go ahead and start the meeting. It is now called to order. Welcome to our second full meeting as the County of San Diego's Independent Redistricting Commission. Let me first turn to our clerk, Andrew Potter, for some key information about today's meeting.
Thank you, Chairman Boehm. I'll begin with a review of the virtual meeting protocol that we've talked about before. For the commissioners, it is important that you keep your microphone on mute until it is your turn to speak. Certainly, you can use the raise hand feature, which I think is helpful for the chair if you wish to speak. If you're having any technical difficulties, please feel free to reach out to me via email or any of the redistricting staff, and we will be happy to assist. Additionally, before we begin, any members of the public who wish to provide oral testimony during today's meeting, please review the instructions posted on the redistricting webpage at www.sandiegocounty.gov/redistricting. Individuals that wish to speak must submit an online request to speak form. Thank you.
Andrew, it's Barbara Hanson. I'm having my usual problem with the video.
Great. I will send you a message to start your video.
Thank you. Got it.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Very good. Before I call the roll, I do want to note for the record, as Andrew was just saying, that all commissioners are participating today via teleconference. As such, all votes will be handled by a roll call vote. I'll ask the commissioners to please unmute your microphone. Oh, sorry, I'm reading Andrew's points again. I'm sorry, because we are moving on to roll call. So Andrew, that's all yours to read. Thank you.
You're doing a great job. Thank you. Appreciate it. As the chair mentioned, that because we are handling this meeting via teleconference, all the votes will be handled by a roll call vote. And then if commissioners could please unmute themselves and say here or present, I will call you alphabetically. We'll start with Chair Boehm.
Here, present.
Commissioner Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Katarina.
Present.
Commissioner Chen, as the chair indicated, will be joining a little bit later this afternoon. Vice Chair Diaz.
Present.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Dostal.
Here.
Commissioner Garcia. Commissioner Hanson. I see Commissioner Hanson. There we go.
Here.
Wonderful, thank you. Here. Commissioner Inman.
Present.
Great. Commissioner Krugliak.
Here.
Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Pons.
Here.
Commissioner Russ.
Here.
Commissioner Serban.
Here.
And I see Commissioner Garcia joined.
Here.
Great. All commissioners are present with the exception of Commissioner Chen.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Moving on to item 3. The next item is non-agenda public communication speakers. This is an opportunity for the public to address the commission on subject matters within the commission's jurisdiction, but not an item on today's specific agenda. The only action the commission may take is a referral to staff. Before we begin, any members of the public who wish to provide oral testimony during today's meeting, please review the instructions again posted on the redistricting webpage at www.sandiegocounty.gov/redistricting. Individuals that wish to speak must submit an online request to speak form. Andrew, do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on non-agenda items?
Thank you. We do. We have 6 requests to speak on non-agenda matters. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to address the commission. We'll be calling speakers by their names if they're logged into the Zoom. If they are dialing in, then we'll call them by the last 4 digits of their phone number. Each speaker will be asked to state their name for the audio record, and as I indicated, you'll have 2 minutes to address the commission. So we'll begin with the first speaker.
Yes, it looks like our first speaker is Donald. Sorry, there was a little audio issue. First speaker is Jonathan Metis. You may proceed.
Good afternoon, commissioners. It's nice to be with you. My name is Jonathan Stein. I am the director of California Common Cause. We are an organization dedicated to building democratic processes of government that encourage public participation.
I'm really sorry. I can't follow that.
Independent redistricting commissions. We were co-authors and major supporters.
Jonathan, pause for a minute. I think there's an issue with our audio timer, so I'm going to start the screen share, please.
There we go. I think the issue was with the screen sharing for the timer. So Maritza, if you want to go ahead and share the screen, but don't share the audio, then we'll see if that corrects the issue. My apologies, Jonathan. We'll restart your timer.
Good afternoon. Were you able to hear any of my that echoes?
Yep. All right, my apologies. Aaron, would you mind sharing your screen?
Sure, we'll try this instead. Okay, let's try this and see if that works.
Fantastic, thanks. Would it be useful for me to start from the beginning?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay.
Please. Thank you, Jonathan.
No problem. Good afternoon, commissioners and staff. It's wonderful to be with you. My name is Jonathan Stein. I'm the executive director at California Common Cause. We are an organization dedicated to building democratic processes at all levels of government that encourage public participation and inspire public trust. To that end, we are supporters of independent redistricting commissions. We were co-authors and major supporters of the ballot initiative that created the statewide Citizens Redistricting Commission, and we've advocated for independent redistricting commissions in a number of cities and counties. We've also worked with the independent commissions in a number of cities and counties as they've begun their work and get established. We joined the group letter to you in December. We thank you for your thoughtful consideration of that letter and for your responsiveness to the recommendations in it. I just want to share a few quick notes as you begin your day today. One, we urge you to act as independently and as transparently as possible throughout, both because this upholds the spirit of an independent commission and also because it maximizes public faith in your work. Two, we recommend that redistricting commissions refrain from making major decisions about their processes until they've had extensive training and gotten input from state and local experts on best practices for a fair and inclusive process. The State Redistricting Commission has followed this approach and we commend them for it. We would be happy to supply the names of national, state, or local experts that you might consult with. And third, we at California Common Cause are convening partners statewide to engage in the state process and have engaged extensively with the state commission's commissioners and staff. We'd be happy to present formally about the commission and their process and about their outreach to the community. Also, the Census Bureau has delayed the release of redistricting data, and we'd be happy to present with you about what's happening with the Census Bureau and what to expect around timelines. We've followed that very closely and have involved in litigation at the national level. Thank you and best wishes in your work.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Jamila Mohammed.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon and Happy New Year. This is Jamila Mohammed from United Women of East Africa. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration of many of the recommendations we made in our December letter. We have two requests regarding public participation. If possible, it would be helpful if you can post your agendas earlier so that the public has time to review and prepare to engage on items of interest. And secondly, the current process for making public comments is challenging since many members of the public may decide to speak on an item after hearing discussion, and it can take time to register and get in the queue. We understand that there are additional costs involved, but we would urge you to post a dial-in number on your agenda, on your website, and on the live feed, and have someone monitor the phone lines to allow callers to make the decision to comment on agenda items as they are discussed and ensure maximum public participation. Thank you, and that's all.
Great, thank you. Our next speaker will be Janine Ericat.
Hello and good afternoon to the commission. I want to thank you all for your time and wish you all a happy new year. First, I want to echo statements that Jamila made. So thank you all for your thoughtful consideration of the many recommendations that we made in our December letter. And we can see that you took that into account into the creation of today's agenda. So again, we really appreciate that. I just wanted to also speak on similar points. So it would be really helpful for us and for the whole community at large if you could post your agendas earlier so that the public has time to review, prepare, engage on agenda items, and also block out time in their day. We really appreciate that you posted the agenda in a multitude of languages prior to today's meetings, but just ask that you also post it earlier on the website so community members can make sure they have time to navigate the website and find it in their preferred language. Like Jamila said, the current process for making public comment is challenging, and we know that there are additional costs involved, but we would urge you to post a dial-in number on your agenda, on your website, on the live feed, and have someone monitor the phone lines to allow callers to make the decision to comment on agenda items as they're discussed and ensure maximum public participation. Thank you all for your time, and I look forward to today's meeting.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Lori Thiel.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I am Lori Thiel, president of the League of Women Voters of San Diego, and our organization also signed on that letter that you all received in December, the coalition, including Common Cause, PANA, et cetera. And I'm just here to reiterate some of the ideas that Jonathan, Jamila, and Janine just shared with you regarding transparency and ease of interaction between the public and this body. So again, I want to reiterate the idea of putting your agenda out earlier. I think there's a lot of opportunity here for you to get good feedback from the public. And if you could just facilitate that with a little bit more time, that would be much appreciated. And I think you would get important and meaningful response. And to also continue to reiterate, having those numbers available and ease of access to the dial-in would probably be beneficial as well. Not just to the public, but to your body as you deliberate and move forward with your work. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate today.
Thank you. We also had a request from Myrna Reyes and Armand King. I don't see them in the Zoom session at this time.
If you're in the session, please raise your hand if perhaps you're listed under a different name.
And then I also see an individual, Joanne Fields, has her hand raised. We'll go ahead and unmute you if you are requesting to speak on non-agenda public comment.
Thank you for the opportunity. Can you hear me?
We can. It's a little bit delayed.
Hello, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Yes.
Hello?
Go ahead, Ms. Fields.
Okay, my name is Joanne Fields from the Asian Pacific Islander Initiative. I wasn't privy to the letter that was circulated in December, and I'm just lucky to have caught this agenda just today. So I would like to see the agenda put forward earlier, bring it with our media outlets so that it can be said far and wide as to the delivered and on our behalf. We want to provide input. I can give you contact information for the Filipino press, of which I'm a writer, and also for Indian Voices. Inclusiveness is the key, especially for redistricting. I was part of the 20 team with the Count Me 2020 Coalition and SANDAG So I know many of the organizations that are in the outreach looking forward to the next steps, which we said was redistricting. So I look forward to work with you.
And it appears that we lost Ms. Fields, but that concludes non-agenda public communication this afternoon. I will note for the record for the commission that we received 12 e-comments that were distributed to the commission and posted online. And Barbara Jimenez, the county's executive lead for redistricting, has a brief comment about these.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. I just wanted to mention that staff is reviewing the e-comments. We did forward all the e-comments to the commissioners for your information, but it appears that, and we recognize that some of them appear to be related to the city of San Diego and other efforts. So we will respond appropriately and direct those e-comments or redirect the e-comments, but we still wanted to ensure that you all had them. Thank you.
So I'll assume that concludes that agenda item. I do want to offer thanks on behalf of my fellow commissioners for all the comments and all the suggestions. We will take them to heart. Some of it I think we'll be discussing today, and we'll be sure to be in touch with staff to see what else can be done. So we'll just ask staff to review all those comments carefully and make sure we're responding appropriately and doing what we can. Seeing no other comments, we'll move on to agenda item 4, approval of minutes from the December 18th meeting. Commissioner Pons, I'm sorry.
Yes, I just want to make sure that my electronic hand raising is working because it's up and obviously it's not working. Can you see anything? Do you see a hand on your screen? Can anybody else test? You see it, Arv? Commissioner Arv, you see it? Commissioner Larson? Okay, so it must be working, but yeah, so my comment was regarding those comments that came in through the email. I'm just gonna say it made me a little uncomfortable. I don't know why we are fielding those type of comments this early. Maybe a repository of those type of comments that are proposing things such as that within somebody's district to make changes, obviously to somebody else, to someone's benefit. I just think it's a little premature and there may be an expectation that we can't meet at this point. I like the first individual that came on and said, wait until you are properly trained and prepared before we field or even review those type of comments. Over.
Thank you, Commissioner Pons. I'm sure we'll address some of that later, including in the item on training.
Commissioner, Chairman.
Yes, sir, please.
I want to ask Ms. Jimenez, she said she was going to refer some of those to the city. And I was kind of surprised myself about the city boundaries and the school boundaries. I wasn't aware that our boundary drawing was affected either one of those. Is that why, Barbara, you said you were going to refer to the city?
Yeah, so we'll connect with the individuals, but it appears that some, based on the comments and the reference to certain district, that it's actually city districts versus county board of supervisor district.
Yeah, and same way with the school districts too. Is that's up to the school districts, not to us.
Correct. So we just wanted to notify the person in case they sent it erroneously to the wrong redistricting.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. Thank you.
Thank you both for that. Commissioner Inman, I do see your hand raised. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So some of the comments were talking about having a real-time ability to chime in and make comments at the beginning of the meeting. Now, can people just simply join this meeting and raise a hand and be recognized? Does that not satisfy that, or am I missing something?
I'll defer to Andrew or Barbara, but I do not think they can do it quite that way.
Anybody can join this meeting. They can either join directly by Zoom or they can dial into the conference line. All of that information is available on the agenda itself and was posted online for the public. The way we have set it up is similar to a Board of Supervisors meeting where individuals can request to speak on those items. And the intent is so that we are aware that there are individuals that want to speak on that. Certainly it is at the commission's discretion whether or not they want to allow individuals that have raised their hand and in the Zoom that might not have requested to speak in advance but want to comment on those. We would defer to the chair whether we would want to take those up. So, but certainly that ability does exist.
Good. Just for a process point of view, I think at least some people's hands are visible when raised. So please go ahead and try to raise your hand. If you don't see me calling on you, or if it seems like it's not working, just start waving and I'll try to keep an eye on the gallery, and I'll ask my fellow commissioners to keep an eye on it as well. All right, so moving on to agenda item 4, approval of the minutes from the December 18th, 2020 meeting. Is there a motion for, well, assuming we have no request from the public to speak on that, is there a motion? Very good. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes?
I move.
Okay. Motion from Commissioner Russ. Do we have a second?
Second. Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, second Vice Chair Diaz, I happen to see. Is there any discussion? Seeing no hands raised or waving. Very good. Andrew, could you please call the roll?
Thank you. Chair Boehm?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Katarina?
Aye.
Commissioner Chen? Absent. Commissioner Vice Chair Diaz?
Aye.
Commissioner Dostal?
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia?
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson?
Aye.
Commissioner Inman?
Aye.
Commissioner Kugliak?
Aye.
Commissioner Larson?
Aye.
Commissioner Pons?
Aye.
Commissioner Russ?
Aye.
Commissioner Serban?
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes unanimously with all commissioners who are present voting aye.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. Okay, moving on. Next item is discussion and possible adoption of the redistricting timeline that was sent to you. But I'd like to take just a moment to provide a suggestion on how we might proceed today so that everyone's time is respected and so that we can get to this ambitious agenda we have. Some items, I think you'd all agree, are going to take less time than others. So as a reminder, for each agenda item, we'll include time after a presentation or initial introduction for clarifying questions. I'd suggest we keep those just to that point, to clarifying things that were in the presentation. Then we'll have time for public comments. Then we'll have a motion for approval or for consideration or to choose an option that will allow us to have full discussion of the item. My intention is that after some of that discussion under each item, we look and see, and I'll just chime in, whether we're getting to a point of closure or whether it looks like we'll need more time. If it looks like we'll need more time, I may ask for a motion to table that agenda item, meaning postpone it till later in the meeting. The goal being that we can get through the agenda, including what I think is going to be a rather healthy discussion on procurement. If we have time and if there's commissioner interest, we'll come back to some of the others. And if not, we'll add them and take them up at a future meeting and can even discuss them briefly under future agenda items. But my hope is that we can go through some of the agenda items relatively quickly and just take a test right away on whether we are reaching a point of closure or a point where we need to extend discussion. Is that an acceptable way to go forward for everyone?
Yes.
Excellent. Good. So with that in mind, we'll now proceed to item 5, discussion and possible adoption of the redistricting timeline. I'll ask Barbara Jimenez, the county's executive lead for redistricting, for some opening comments before a presentation from council. Barbara.
Thank you, Chair. One of the significant considerations for your commission is planning for the public meetings and tasks necessary to fulfill the redistricting responsibilities. And we've definitely heard the feedback and the input and the comments from all of you. And so we understand that redistricting really occurs over a defined period of less than a year. And it's really, you know, bounded at the front end by the release of the census data, and at the back end by those statutory deadlines to adopt a redistricting plan. And throughout that time, there are those statutory requirements that guide the process. Council and staff have worked extensively and very closely to develop, and I want to reinforce, it's a draft monthly timeline as a starting point, just as a starting point for a path forward, taking into consideration the law as well as the experience and knowledge of redistricting that our council and team bring forward. It's a somewhat general to cover high level objectives as specific dates times we know will be fleshed out as we move forward, and then as well as when the contractors are on board. The commission, the way this has been brought before you today, the commission will have every opportunity along the way to revise, review, and direct and guide the timeline as needed. This is just an initial starting point. So before I turn it over to Marguerite, our legal counsel is going to be giving some more details. I just want to also acknowledge the comments that we heard earlier, that there are uncertainties. There's many uncertainties and unknowns that could impact that timeline. We understand that, we recognize that. We are all hearing the delays from the federal census that may impact the California's receipt of the census data, which also could delay the start of our mapping work. The creation of the IRC is new. Even though we participated 10 years ago, it's completely different. So it really also brings uncertainties about the process. I think many of us are learning, whether it's from other redistricting and also leveraging those best practices. And we welcome and really appreciate the amount of public testimony and the potential number of maps for the commission's consideration. So while the statutory deadline to adopt a final map is December 15th, the timeline has the commission adopting a final map well ahead of that time. And Marguerite will go into full detail, but this is for several reasons, mainly the 30-day waiting period required for any referendum on the final map. So we just want to ensure that we can allow adequate time to coordinate with the San Diego County Office of Voters, of Registrar of Voters, to ensure that work will seamlessly integrate into the creation of the voting precincts for the county. And so again, 10 years ago, it was a different experience. We had the ability to technically do some of those adjustments after the board adopted the final redistricting plan. And that was key for the Registrar of Voters to maintain the board's intent of the adoption of the district boundaries. However, those changes that we're all aware of in the state law make that impossible this time around. So we want to make sure that we're allowing enough time towards the end of the process for the Registrar of Voters, also who we're working closely with, to ensure the commission's final map has no technical questions. And again, I'd like to ensure or recommit to all of you that staff and council are working continuously in reviewing the timeline and bringing forward any recommendations or proposals for adjustments that may be needed to the commission for consideration as more information becomes available. So with that, I'll turn it over to IRC counsel, Marguerite Leone, for a brief presentation. Marguerite, you're on mute.
Will we ever learn? Anyway, good afternoon to all of you. I think we have a PowerPoint that kind of chunks up this timeline in a different type of presentation from how it is presented in the staff report. I want to reemphasize what Barbara said. This is tentative. And as of the beginning of this week, it's probably more tentative than we even intended it to be. So I would look at it as a sample of one potential scenario, and probably not the likely scenario. That is because, as Mr. Stein mentioned, it's gotten to me more than likely that the census data is going to be delayed, and likely significantly delayed. When this timeline was first conceptualized, it anticipated an on-time census. We don't anticipate that, and we'll get to the end of the timeline and show how that has been adjusted. But fundamentally, the timeline set forth in your staff report front loads the process leading up to a census release in April. The first initial months are, of course, your training, your organizational activities, your onboarding, and many, many decisions that you have to make. And that's the first slide leading up to April. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because of the tentative nature of this. And then going to slide number 2. Erin, are you moving the slides or am I? Oh, no, here we are. We had initially envisioned a pre-mapping period in May and June. It would be about a month after the census data was available to you, with first draft maps coming out maybe about mid-June. There would be ongoing public hearings and, of course, facilities and opportunities for the public actually to draw maps themselves and to propose them. Then going to the next slide. The mapping activities continued through June and August, through July and August, with in the area of mid-August, after about 10 to 12 weeks of mapping, public hearings, public input, the commission would have selected a preferred map. At that point, the preferred map would go to the registrar of voters. The registrar of voters needs to weigh in for a number of reasons. Number one, you're going to be mapping based on census data that will have been a year old by the time you get to it. It was taken in April of 2020. I have had redistricting cases where by the time the redistricting agency got to work, there was a new housing development where there used to be open fields. And who can tell us that is the registrar of voters. And also the registrar of voters needs to prepare for the opening of the election season in December. So it's important that the registrar has time to look at what you consider to be very close to the final map. And we have built that period into the August and September timeframe. The map then would come back to you, the registrar's changes, you would consider them, make sure that they are consistent with your intent in the map, and the map would be finalized. And at the end of a September timeframe, you would be passing your final resolution. The statutory scheme provides that your map is subject to referendum. So there needs to be a 30-day period where the final map is adopted by you, and the public needs to consider that map and decide whether they want to submit a referendum period. On this general timeline that happens in the September and October time period, and ending in November. In November, then your plan would become final. You would no longer change it, because if it became final once it was not subject to referendum, there would be some administrative work to do, and it would eventually go to the clerk of the board. So we get you finished on this initial tentative timeline in November. It's very front-loaded. It gives you flexibility to extend different periods, more pre-map hearings, more post-map hearings, more investigations of whatever type you would like. The time is built in for you. But what I do want to move to is the next slide. And these are your deadlines. Let's go to the slide after that. This is what we know. I think it's slide 6. And this is what we know as of a court hearing that occurred at the beginning of this week. And I want to emphasize that we have no official notice from the census, at least I didn't as of yesterday, about delay in the data. So officially, it's still supposed to be out on time. But in a judicial proceeding in San Jose, a representation was made to the court by the attorneys for the Census Bureau that the data would be delayed until at least early March. And that is the apportionment data, not the redistricting data. The apportionment data goes to the House of Representatives. The redistricting data would not come to you until several months later. And then on top of that, there's legislation pending in Congress that could actually delay your receipt of the redistricting data until quite a bit later in the summer. So we have envisioned an alternative plan which pushes your work to the end of the time period, right up against your deadline. And your January, April period would still be organizational and training. But what would happen is you would commence your public hearing in the April, May timeframe. That would actually be April, May, sometime into June timeframe. And the unfortunate thing about the delay of the census is you wouldn't have the data with your pre-mapping public hearings, but the community is going to be able to tell you about themselves, and they can tell you about the existing lines. They can tell you about what binds them together as a community of interest, what other communities of interest are similar or dissimilar, and reasons why they should be held together. So it can be productive time. And then in this alternative world, we expect the census to come in, to California about the end of July and to you about the end of August. And if we go to the next slide, and that shoves all of the mapping activity into the September, October timeframe, we're going to have to lean on the registrar to work with us and accelerate his review. We are going to, by law, need to commence the referendum period in November. The referendum period is 30 days, and that brings us right up to the deadline. So if delays happen, and I think we need to expect them, we're going to have a very, very intense working period in the last half of the summer and in the early fall of 2021. The last slide, these are what would be different. We have proposed in the staff report a front-loaded process, tentative, leisurely, and malleable for your desires. The difference if we get crushed by the census is your pre-mapping hearings would likely be conducted without the benefit of the census data. July, August is when we expect the census data, or when legislation would say we should get it. That's an approximately 4-month delay from what was anticipated. Mapping will occur in a tight 2-month period, September, October. We need to build in processes so that can happen quickly, but effectively and with full public input. Of course, the referendum period, and your final deadline is the 15th of December. So at this time, this is an overview for you. I can't emphasize enough Barbara's comment that this is tentative. We cannot be definite with regard to mapping until we know when we get the census. But we can be very, very flexible with your desires on onboarding assistants and consultants, setting plans for outreach and learning, training, and all of those items. The rubber will hit the road when we get the census data. But by that time, I'm hoping we'll be more than ready to go. And that's my presentation, and I'm happy to take clarifying questions.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Please go ahead.
Yes. Marguerite, are there data available for, that was available 10 years ago for us to be able to take a look at? So we can see the format in which it might be presented to us and how it was massaged or whatever. Are those data available to us?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We can in the training, and I would anticipate we're going to have a presentation on training today, that you would have a full training on the data that is available to you for redistricting, including the data that was used in 2010. That is most certainly available to you. It's important that you understand the strengths and the weaknesses of the data and can take a look at exactly what you will be seeing when it does come out.
Yeah, I imagine there's quite a folder, a file of data
Yes.
that it's going to be very difficult for you to present in a PowerPoint or something on an online training. Is there something that we could come down to the county office building and in your archives, sit down and look through the data and see how the data was presented, how maybe it was massaged and what ended up? Is that possible to see
Yeah,
that?
Commissioner, can we get back to you? I'm sure that data is available. I don't know if it's in a file or if it's electronic, but let's find out what it is. I would propose that if it's in the correct format, we can even email it to all the commissioners. And if not, we can, obviously you can come down and see it.
Yeah, I would imagine there's a lot of flat files, the flat files of which would be very difficult to email and to see.
Right.
So it would, that could be helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Very good, thanks. So I'll ask for other clarifying questions at this point. Commissioner Inman, then Commissioner Serban, then Commissioner Larson. Please, Commissioner Inman.
Okay, thank you. Clarifying question about data that can be used for redistricting. Now, we talked about the census, the PL 94 data is a redistricting data, but there's also ACS data, which is more current. Can we use that to kind of form preliminary analysis or do preliminary analysis so we're not totally in a fog?
Yes, it will be very rough. It will be out of date and it will not be a head count. I want to emphasize that it is a survey that is ongoing, but it can give a feeling of where the demographics are of the county, most certainly, of some of the major cities, not the smaller areas because of how the data is collected, but also of the current supervisorial groups. It will be, I need to emphasize, extremely rough, but it will be a fuzzy picture of perhaps what you'll see in the census count.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Serban.
So I see that with the public hearings, what I think are referred to as pre-mapping public hearings, they're not to commence until May in either of the proposed timelines. I'm wondering, does it make sense to consider holding those or commencing those earlier than May to give us more time? Is it because you just said it seems like they're not really tied to the release of the census data. So maybe we could consider starting them earlier and then being able to have more hearings or be more flexible with the timing of our hearings or otherwise just have a larger timeline to do that. So could you please?
I absolutely think you can consider them earlier. Actually, the reason they were put in May in the original timeline, or the first proposal, I'm not going to even call it an original timeline, is it was right after receipt of the census. So kind of nice to have the census out there for the public as well. But public hearings are useful even without the hearings, and they can surely be moved up. And you will notice in the timeline, we have in every single month anticipated that public groups are going to send a note to our chair or to our senior staff and say, we would like 15 minutes to present to the commission on a topic, on our community, on any number of issues within your jurisdiction. And we're hoping those groups come forward. They certainly have to the State Commission. I hope they come forward to us. A second reason for somewhat of a delay is the hope of onboarding our public outreach consultant that will be able to help educate us on the most effective timing and methods. And so the public outreach was starting after you had your plan in place. But there's no reason that we can't short circuit that, use the talents that you have and that our staff has, and start early. That's surely on the table.
One other question. I'm not sure, but was there in the past an extension of the statutory deadline in response to a previous delay of the census data? And then if so, is there any chatter of that possibly occurring again?
I love that question. There was an extension by the court for the California Commission, and there was an extension by law for you. So your new deadline is fixed in a statute that went into effect 2 weeks ago. It has crossed my mind that we may need some legislation to help out here. And I think we keep this on our agenda. And if there are any number of groups that find that the process is undermined by the rush, the legislature would be where we would go, I think, first before a court. It is going to require a full retooling of the election deadlines, because you look at the timelines that staff has put together for you. Your deadline is the 15th of December, and the in lieu filing period for candidates opens the next day. So all of that's going to have to be shoved back, and the impact on election administration is going to be fairly dramatic. But I'm not taking it off the table. When I saw the new legislation pending in the House to extend these deadlines, it was the first thing that crossed my mind. Our commissions are going to need help. So I'm glad your mind is there too.
Thank you both for that. Commissioner Serban, was that all you wanted to ask for clarifying? Good. Let me just ask, I've got Commissioner Larson. Does anybody else have clarifying questions? We'll still have a discussion, I promise. Good. Commissioner Larson, then we'll move to public comment.
Okay, well, I'd like to just urge that we keep our options open. I think the census is so uncertain at the moment. We're getting a new administration next week. We're getting a new director of the census. There's been many public comments about how poorly the current census was conducted. My wife and I know several people who were enumerators here over the last several months, and they've just told one horror story after another about how it was done here in San Diego. I imagine other groups are going to find the same thing in other parts of the country. So one possibility is the census would be redone next year. And that just would change a lot. I'm just saying, let's keep our options open. Let's proceed on the schedule that Marguerite has recommended here. I think we should have pre-mapping discussions with the public, but I think it's all very much up in the air at the moment. And that's my comment.
Thank you, Commissioner Larson. The purpose of the timeline was just to give you an idea of the work that needed to be done. and all of the uncertainties around that in timing right now. So we appreciate your comments. Staff and I have been thinking about this very, very hard.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Marguerite and Barbara, for the presentations. Andrew, do we have any public comment on this agenda item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 5 requests to speak on this item, and we'll be calling speakers by their last name if they're logged into the Zoom meeting, and we'll be calling them in order that we receive their request. Each individual will have 3 minutes to address the commission, and we'll ask that you please state your name for the audio record. And we will begin with Janine Arakat.
Hello everyone again, Janine Arakat from PANA. I want to thank the county staff for putting this robust timeline together. It's not clear what action you'll be taking on the timeline today, so I just have two comments to make on some of the discussion that you've already mentioned. So first, in regards to the census delay, just really wanted to uplift that the timeline for the redistricting process that is currently being proposed would not allow enough time for meaningful public engagement in light of the delayed census data release date and uncertainty. Given the ongoing certainty and the reality of COVID, we urge you to create a working timeline that has December 15th, 2021 as your map adoption deadline, and that you work backwards from that date to determine your windows for pre and post mapping public engagement, as well as the critical time period after census data is released when you will use new census data to conduct racialized polarized voting analysis and assess Voting Rights Act compliance. COVID and the challenges it presented for census created uncertainty and delays. An extended and certain deadline facilitates efficient planning, ensures the commission will have the time it needs to engage the public in the more challenging COVID environment, and gives other stakeholders, including community organizations, the certainty they need to plan for and engage the public in the redistricting process. Additionally, we want to confirm that the timeline will be a living document, particularly since you have not received any training on what is required for the redistricting process and discussed how you want to conduct that process. For example, the proposed timeline lays out a 5 post-draft meeting hearings. However, 5 hearings is the minimum required by law. You may decide that you will have more hearings given there are 3 million people in the county and there's tremendous diversity within each supervisional districts. On the note of public presentations, it's great to see that the timeline includes ongoing, more formal presentations by community groups and the public. We'd appreciate it if you could share what you envision as the process for groups to request time for those presentations and who they should reach out to for more information. And please let us know if we can make recommendations for topics you may want to cover and groups with expertise in those areas. Thank you all for your time, and I look forward to listening in on the continued discussion.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Lori Thiel.
Hi again, thank you. I'm Lori Thiel, president of the League of Women Voters of San Diego, and I am just calling in to reiterate again Janine's points here that she just made. We have aligned ourselves with this coalition that is very interested in uplifting and supporting your group, and we want to just make sure that we have an opportunity to weigh in and provide support for you. And so again, just to reiterate her points, we would just like to urge you to make a working timeline that has December 15th as your adoption deadline, 2021 as your adoption deadline, and to just confirm that this timeline will be a living document. You know, as even you have mentioned, your members here have mentioned on this call, you know, it's important for this body to be nimble and to be able to be responsive to the needs of its constituents in respect to the pandemic and the way the census has been managed this year. So just keeping options open and making sure that timeline is a living document would be, I think, beneficial to your work and to the outcome of your process here. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Yasmin Obeid. I apologize if I mispronounced your last name.
No worries. Hello, everyone. My name is Yasmin Obeid, and I'm the Advocacy and Campaign Coordinator with the Majdal Center, which is an Arab Resource Center here in El Cajon. I first want to start by thanking you all for the excellent presentation and for all your work. We appreciate your consistent work and incorporating the community's comments and community suggestions. As the Arab Resource Center in El Cajon, we do represent and work with a large Arabic speaking communities, whether they're Syrian, Iraqi, or different backgrounds. And which is why really I'm calling to reiterate the points that my previous colleagues mentioned, and encourage you all to really look at the current timeline and how it doesn't, and it won't allow for meaningful community and public engagement, especially communities who English is not their first language, and they might need to engage with you all in their languages. I encourage you to really push or make the December 15, 2021 deadline as your MAP adoption deadline. And then as Janine and my and the other colleague it reiterated, to work backwards from that deadline and determine your windows for pre and post map and public comments. And in regards to public engagement, we really see 5 forums is the minimum, and we appreciate you doing that. However, we want to urge you to increase that number and really focus on ensuring there are interpreters in those public forums when you're addressing communities of color whose English is not their first language, especially in El Cajon. We urge you to have Arabic interpreters to make sure that our communities are able to engage with you all and understand the process fully, and are able to give meaningful feedback to you all. Please, if you have the ability, address what is your plan in ensuring that our communities understand and are engaged. Do you have interpreters in your plan already? How are you able, or how do you plan to address the language gap? How do you plan to address all community members in San Diego, regardless of language obstacles? Are you working with community orgs on the ground? I would really love to hear your plan on that to ensure that our communities are all represented and able to communicate their needs to you all. Again, thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lori Schellenberger.
Good afternoon. My name is Lori Schellenberger, and I'm a voting rights and redistricting consultant, and I'm calling in my capacity as a consultant to Common Cause. And you heard from Jonathan Stein earlier, their executive director, and I'm calling in as the redistricting consultant who has been facilitating a statewide collaborative for them around redistricting, and I was intimately involved in the negotiations around the Supreme Court case that extended the state commission's deadline, as well as the legislation that extended your deadline. So I wanted to provide just a little bit more information on that in terms of the December 15th deadline and what that means for the referendum period and the in lieu filing dates. And the legislature and leadership was intimately aware of and very aware of the fact that this was not an ideal situation, that it pushed up against those important time periods. And so I can provide more information if you're interested in that, but the goal of the legislature and this California Supreme Court was to ensure that the public input period was protected if census data was delayed, even if that meant pushing up against those deadlines. And the legislature recognized that they may have to come back to the table and shorten the in lieu filing period in order to allow for the referendum period. And shortening that in lieu filing period is something that is possible to do through emergency legislation if needed. So I just wanted to point that out, that the issues that your council is very correctly highlighting are things that were extensively discussed. Elections officials were very involved in those negotiations, and there was consensus around the fact that we need to protect the public input period. So if you want more information, I can provide that. The second thing I just wanted to highlight regarding your timeline, and I just want to commend you for a really thoughtful timeline that you put together, even though it's very frustrating that the census data release date is such a moving target and it's hard to have certainty. But I wanted to just clarify the distinction between the public input period during which you might receive community of interest testimony, which you don't need census data for the public to be able to do that, and the very important public input period after census data is released, because the public will want to evaluate the census data and perhaps submit maps to you based on that new census data. So you want to protect that time period and recognize that while you can get community of interest testimony prior to the release of census data, you will want to make sure the public has plenty of time, just like your line drawer and your voting rights council will do. The public will also want to evaluate the census data and make sure they're advocating for Voting Rights Act compliant districts and other districts that are dependent upon having that data.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is David Lagstein.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
All right, good. I was going to say good morning, good afternoon. My name is David Lagstein, and I represent the members of SEIU Local 221, and we represent over 12,000 working families in the county. I want to just commend observing the proceedings so far, that there's been a open-minded process to really be listening to public input to make sure that we have a good process to draw some lines that maximizes participation. And without reiterating all the points, we want to lend our voice to agree with those that have testified that we think the appropriate way to deal with this, including the uncertainty, is to look at December 15th as a goal to end this process, and then to work backwards, understanding there needs to be a little bit of flexibility along the way. So again, we want to thank those that participated, thank the commissioners for listening, and look forward to an inclusive process. Thank you.
Thank you. We also had a request from Nancy Gwynn. If Nancy is logged into the Zoom meeting and would still like to speak, please raise your hand in the Zoom session. Seeing no virtual movement, Mr. Chair, this concludes public comment on this item.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. Thank you yet again for the public input. It's greatly appreciated. Keeping an eye on the clock.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can there be just a comment about that? I appreciate the idea of pushing it back to December 15th.
Russ, I'm gonna ask your indulgence for a moment. I want to follow the rules on this so that we keep things clear.
Okay.
Let me take a motion first, if a commissioner wishes to so move, to approve the timeline as an initial framework and a living document.
Okay.
I think there might be interest in doing that. Can I have a motion to that effect?
I'll move that. I'll move that.
Moved by Commissioner Russ. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Brown, thank you very much. Commissioner Russ, and then I'll look for hands and such, but I'm hoping we can have this conversation fairly quickly. Please go ahead.
Yeah, the only concern I have about pushing it back to December 15th is that you remove all the slack that there may be in the schedule. The other thing is, I understand, I heard Marguerite tell us that we needed to pass this through the registrar of voters as well, because they may have some updates. And so that leaves little or no time to really caucus with them. And so I think, and that's why I moved to say, no, I think this is a good timeline. I think this is doable. There's slack in the end product. Not a lot of slack, but there is some slack, and that's nice to have.
Thank you for that. Any other comments? Commissioner Serban.
So a couple things. Thank you for the public comments from everyone. Ms. Abed, Yasmin Abed, her comment about the how it is we will engage with the diverse language communities. I'd suggest maybe we can take that up when we discuss the draft RFP and maybe adding that sort of language in our community outreach RFP. With Ms. Schellenberger, thank you for the legislative background behind what happened with the extension. I would welcome any other information that you could provide. With that, it sounds like you had more background information, and I'm interested to hear what that is. Otherwise, those are the only two things I wanted to say.
Very good. Thank you. Any other comments by commissioners? Commissioner Garcia.
I just want to clarify the motion to adopt the calendar, proposed timeline as a living document. Is this the original one that was being proposed, or is this the one that has the delayed, even more delayed timeline? I just want to clarify that.
Thank you very much. It's a great clarification. My understanding, and I should have said it before, was that this would include the entire package, both the more narrative form and both sets of slides, including the planning ahead for census delays. If this passes, I will leave it to staff, but I imagine we will have some sort of consolidated timeline back to us, probably as soon as the next meeting, but certainly something that will continue to grow and I think address some of the questions that you and the other commissioners have just been mentioning, and as well as came up in public comments. So it's a great clarification. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Other comments? Very good. So I'll ask Andrew to call the roll for a vote on the motion to approve the timeline package as an initial framework as we just described. Andrew, please go ahead.
Thank you. Chair Boehm?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Katarina?
Aye.
Commissioner Chen? Vice Chair Diaz?
Aye.
Commissioner Dostal?
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia?
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson?
Slow learner. Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Inman?
Aye.
Commissioner Kugliak?
Aye.
Commissioner Larson?
Aye.
Commissioner Pons?
Aye.
Commissioner Russ?
Aye.
Commissioner Servin?
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously with all commissioners who are present voting aye.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. And again, I think living document is a very good way to put it. And I'm glad we have a mutual understanding on that. Very well. Moving on to agenda item 6, discussion and possible adoption of the regular meeting schedule. I think you all have received this in the email package that was sent. To briefly summarize, regular meetings are proposed for twice a month. Let me turn to Barbara for some brief comments on that and other aspects of the issue. Barbara, please.
Thank you, Chair. So briefly, in creating the schedule, staff followed the IRC bylaws and guidance from all of you, feedback from all of you. We also reviewed the Board of Supervisors calendar, and the reason for that is we wanted to ensure there were no conflicts in the date. We want to make sure that our community is able to attend both Board of Supervisors meetings and also the team that supports them, as well as the commission. I want to stress that the adoption of today's what we're calling a regular meeting schedule gives the public the ability to plan ahead, and we heard those comments today, to be able to participate. Also, of course, we can continue to notify the public of our regular meetings and engage with community and continued participation. I also wanted to mention that through the County Communications Office and the Clerk of the Board, the county has been informing the public of the commission, your meetings, and opportunities for public participation through the website, through social media, media releases, email, and so those activities would continue. And of course, once a public outreach contractor comes on board, they would continue with the work, encouraging many people to share their opinions at the regular meetings. As Chairman Boehm mentioned, this is again a starting point. This is a draft. It's not set in stone, meaning that it could be easily revised based on the commission's direction. For example, what we heard from many of you, both in public comment and from you commissioners, is that we might need to increase the number of meetings. We might need to consider evening meetings. We might need to consider weekend meetings. So this gives us a starting point for your approval to get those posted. And then of course, additional public hearings may be later desired based on the timeline we just heard. And also, again, scheduling those special meetings. In particular, for public outreach, but also for that RFP procurement process. So I just wanted to clarify that this is just a starting point, and then we can go from there. And I turn it over to you, Chair Bain.
Thank you very much. Any clarifying questions? Commissioner Inman, and then Commissioner Pons.
So we would have these regularly scheduled meetings. You said it's a living document. How much notice needs to be given if we anticipate changing one of those regularly scheduled meetings? And how much notice do we need to give, say we wanted to move it to a weekend? Do we need like 2 weeks before that meeting, say that we're going to have a meeting on a weekend? I guess just what's the notification period if we want to change something?
Marguerite or Andrew, you can correct me.
Jump in, yeah. I would do that.
Either one.
Jump into your presentation, Barbara. What would happen is if a regular meeting had to be canceled, you just put out a notice of cancellation. All of the other meetings are special meetings, and it would have a particular agenda, and they can be noticed in 24 hours. And you also have the ability, if the Thursday 2 p.m. or 6 p.m. meeting isn't working, to change your whole schedule with a vote. So you have quite a bit of flexibility. This at least gives the public something to anticipate.
Just to add on to that, for regular meetings, the agendas are required to be posted 72 hours in advance.
Yes, and if I could just add one thing, Andrew, and that is when you get to your public hearings, there's much longer notice required, but we're not there yet. We'll keep you on track when it comes to that notice.
Commissioner Pons.
Yes, thank you. I do appreciate the staff getting the read ahead material out early in advance. So that was good. Thank you very much. What I like to do is get some idea of the start and stop times, because the dates twice a week, that's fine, the periodicity. But, you know, as you heard earlier when we started, there were individuals that said, I have to leave at this time and this time and this time before. So getting an idea of, is it going to be 2 hours, 3 hours, that would help us to anticipate the time we need to dedicate to these meetings and sort of keep us on track. Over.
Does staff want to comment on that?
Well, I'll jump back in again, Barbara, but I think this is an excellent proposal. The times are completely flexible. It's not unusual for commissions like you to meet in the evenings and at other times. And I do agree that we will develop over time, and I can see it in Chair Bain's eyes, a desire from some bookends on our meetings. And I think as we get better at this and more knowledgeable, that's going to happen. And I think, 2 hours is not unreasonable. And if we need an extra meeting, then we schedule it.
I would just add that as we're seeing today, it's somewhat unpredictable how long it will go when we don't know how many public comments we're going to have. I think we're all in strong agreement that we want to have as many public comments and inputs as we can. My intent, at least for today's meeting and the next few meetings, are 2 hours in principle. But as we can already see, that can require some flexibility. And I can tell you, after this agenda item, I'm going to ask how the commission wants to proceed, given that we already know one commissioner needs to leave us at 4. And I am glad to see Commissioner Chen has been able to join us, and I just wanted to note that for the record. Commissioner Serban, did you want to make a comment? Clarifying question, I should say at this point.
So for the special meetings, do special meetings have to have any sort of exigence to them, or are they just any meeting? Like, in order for us to hold a special meeting, it's just any meeting that's not a regularly scheduled meeting, right?
Correct. That's correct. You can have emergency meetings. I have a hard time believing an emergency is going to come up. It's any meeting other than a regular meeting, and it has to stick. Usually it's on a single item. You may want to pull something off agenda and say, this is too big, let's do it on a special meeting.
Thank you.
Any more clarifying questions? Then I want to ask briefly for public comment and have a discussion on a motion. Seeing none. Andrew, do we have any public comments on this?
Thank you, Chair Boehm. Yes, we have one request to speak on this item, and I'll invite Janine Arakat to speak, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the commission.
Hello, everyone. Janina Arakat again. Thank you, county staff and Ms. Jimenez again for uplifting public comments and all the work that has gone into this timeline. I know it's very difficult coordinating with all the commissioners' busy schedules, more to supervisors, but I also wanted to ask generally if you could take into consideration the redistricting commission meeting times for the city of San Diego, Chula Vista, and Escondido, since you have overlapping residents. And as was mentioned, we ask that you consider meeting times that allow people with conflicting work schedules to attend. I would like to also note that 24 or 72-hour notices do not account for even possible interpretation or translation services that are needed for these meetings, nor does 24 hours provide enough time for input even in English. As we just saw in today's meeting, you voted on something that was revised in real time and does not even allow the comment to respond. For example, the state commission has to post their agendas 2 weeks ahead of their meeting time to allow for members of the public to make time in their schedule to attend, submit their public comment and e-comments beforehand. I know this is a difficult decision to make, but just ask that you take into account all of this nuance to really make sure that the public can fully participate despite even conflicting work schedules or even attending different redistricting commission meetings. Thank you all again for your time.
And that concludes public communication on this item.
Very good. Let me ask if there is a motion to adopt the regular meeting schedule with the understanding that it will continue to grow and be readdressed and considered, and in effect will be a living document as well, so that we can have the most effective and widest possible participation in meetings. But do we have a motion to adopt the calendar on that basis?
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Second.
Second.
We'll take the motion from Commissioner Henson, second from Commissioner Larson. Are there comments from the commissioners on it?
I just want to clarify one thing about, I think there might be a confusion with the public about what we're adopting here. This is our regular schedule versus the public pre-mapping workshops and all public meetings regarding that process. It's definitely in statute that there's a certain notice of time, as it was correctly pointed out earlier, that we need to abide to. So, but what we're doing right now is our regular meeting schedule. So I just want to make that clear if that's not clear. And it's not set in, I mean, we can make adjustments.
Thank you for that. Let me get hands first and then we'll start calling. So I see Commissioner Dostal, Commissioner Serban. Okay, we'll start with that. Commissioner Dostal.
I just wanted to point out that I'm on the Chula Vista Commission as well, and we're the third Thursday, so for sure it doesn't conflict. Our regular schedule doesn't conflict with Chula Vista's regular schedule, just FYI.
Thank you. We'll try to keep protecting everyone's time, and I appreciate that. Commissioner Serban.
So we've heard a number of public comments about with regard to requesting the agenda released earlier to allow for public review and greater public participation. Can we have a discussion or hear from staff as to what the prospect of that might be?
Chair Boehm, would you like me to respond? Commissioner Serban, I can definitely come back with the team and look at that. So I will just note for this meeting, for example, what we heard from the commissioners at the last meeting is you wanted to be able to have the presentations also in advance. And so we're working diligently to get the presentations, the staff reports, and the agenda all posted. And we went right up to the wire to get it posted, because we're having the meetings every 2 weeks. So that is, part of it is, I think, because We're in the initiation phases. We're working closely with council. And as I mentioned before, a lot of this is unknown. So I think that is what's playing into that. At this point, I would be happy to take it back and see what we can do. But I think part of that is the unknown and all of us working together and consulting very closely with council as we're moving forward, which is why we're coming up right against that.
Thank you. And yeah, I recognize there's a ton of hard work that's going into making that agenda happen. So I know it's not easy to get it out any earlier. You know, I'm sure we're getting it out as early as we can. But yeah, I'm hoping we can get out even earlier. In coming up with the draft meeting schedule that we're considering now, was there any consideration given to the overlapping jurisdictions that are within the County of San Diego that are also undergoing this process? And their schedule, their meeting schedules, and hopefully how we're not conflicting with those jurisdictions?
Not that I'm aware of. I think what we did is based it on what our current meeting has been. I'm glad, thank you, Commissioner Del Stal, for mentioning the Chula Vista. We can definitely go back. Again, this is a starting point. If we find that there is a significant conflict, or the commissioners again would like to move to a special meeting or have a different schedule or alternate between an evening and a day, we can also do that. Marguerite, did I miss something?
No, well, I did look.
Oh, sorry. Okay, perfect.
I did look, Barbara, just because I just was curious, because I would have, we had an internal discussion of, well, maybe we should do some evening meetings. And I looked to see what the other commissions were doing, at least locally. And they are meeting in the evenings. So since this was meetings are late afternoons. And so since this was something that was going to be discussed, we left them at 2 o'clock now because you don't have a conflict. And the question is whether you're comfortable with that. You've heard that make them accessible. Is 2 o'clock accessible, etc. And evening meetings do pose conflicts, but then not everybody can take off work to attend at 2 o'clock. So we have a number of balancing to do that.
Good. Commissioner Brown, did I see your hand?
The two questions I was going to ask Commissioner Serban already asked those. So I did note that there were several public speakers that were requesting that we move the agenda timeline up as far as getting it out to the public or getting it out to us. So I don't know if that means 1 day moved up or if they need more than that, 2 or 3 days. Maybe we should find out from them too, what would be a reasonable amount of time and see if that'll happen, see if that can happen. So
Commissioner,
that was it.
no, it's a very good point. It's a good point, and we'll try to get an answer. Let me see if we can get Commissioner Katerina in. Are there any other commissioners who wish to speak on this? At least right now, Commissioner Krugliak. So Commissioner Katerina, Commissioner Krugliak, and then I'll ask staff to respond to Commissioner Brown's questions as well as any others. Commissioner Katerina.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate all the work that has gone into this, Barbara and Marguerite. Amazing job getting all this together. I think, having worked on a lot of boards and having dealt with the Brown Act requirements, I think one of the things that is going to be most helpful is at least initially for us to have a set schedule and a set time. So if we know that this is going to be the second and fourth Thursday, and we know it's going to be at 2 o'clock, then people who are following our meetings will know 3 days in advance at the very minimum there will be an agenda. And I think that will give a lot of consistency and support to the folks who are looking at the public comment period. In addition, special meetings are difficult. I find that the Brown Act requirements of 24-hour notice is a little bit too short. So I would hope that we can notice special meetings, more earlier than the 24-hour notice, just to give people time. And obviously we'll have to have our public communications department and consultant working also to make sure that the word gets out when there is a special meeting, because we know we will likely have more special meetings. And that's it for me.
Thank you for that. Let me take Commissioner Krugliak and then ask staff for responses.
Thank you. So I just want to say that I empathize with 2 p.m. Thursday meeting, that if that's every 2 weeks, you know, some people just can't change their work schedule, even if they would like to attend. At the same time, I would prefer that we reach a final agreement today if possible, rather than having another thing that is tentative and that will be an agenda item at a later meeting that potentially will make the meeting longer. So, I mean, if it's reasonable to finalize on a bi-weekly schedule, one at 2 p.m. on Thursdays, one at a time that potentially is more accessible to people who are not able to get off of work, that still reaches, that still gets us to a very firm, recurring timeline that gets to Commissioner Katarina's comments about exactly when to be looking for the agenda, but potentially if some people cannot make a 2 p.m. time on alternating meetings, they could make an evening time. So I'd just like to maybe consider whether we could finalize a schedule that perhaps alternates 2 p.m. versus a later time for those members who would like to attend.
Thank you for that. Let me give staff a chance to comment and then see where we are.
Commissioner Beam, if the desire of the commission is to move forward with a 2 p.m., if I'm hearing Commissioner Krugak, 2 p.m. and the alternate one being a later one, then I defer to the clerk and counsel on how to phrase that motion, But yes, absolutely, we are here to serve the commission.
Let me just ask the commissioners, because it's partly on them, and I won't say Commissioner Krugak has to be the sole voice on this, but are we talking for an alternative, a start time of something like 5 p.m. or something like 7 p.m.?
7 would be late.
I was thinking 5:30.
Commissioner Dostal, 5:30, you're saying?
Yeah, that way people
Oh,
are.
I was thinking 7.
Or 6.
Okay.
5:30 or 6.
Okay, hold on, I'm sorry. Commissioner Garcia?
Yeah, I actually have been wondering the same thing about alternating, about responding to some of the public comments regarding having meetings that were made it easier for more people to attend. So I like the idea of alternating the time. Although I was thinking more like 5 or 5:30. I think, but I would be open to, I mean, I would consider something else, but I was thinking earlier.
Commissioner Brown, you were saying 7?
No, I was saying probably 5:30 or 6
I'm sorry.
also,
Okay.
because they can go 3 hours. So
Right.
then you're getting pretty late in the evening.
I've done public meetings that have started at 7:30.
Okay. Commissioner Pons?
Yes, I just recommend that we have an alternating time. One starts at 2 to 5, and the other one starting at 17:30, 5:30 to 8:30.
Okay. From what I've heard, let me ask Commissioner Pons, then, are you amending the motion so that we would adopt the calendar, but every other meeting would be 5:30 to 8:30 on Thursday?
That is correct.
Okay, so that is now the motion on the table. Commissioner Dostal, please.
Can I suggest 5:30 to 7:30?
Yeah, again, from my perspective, just from a process point of view, whatever we may think the closing time is, it's going to be hard to predict. So we can certainly use 2 to 2.5 hours as a template. I know there are plenty of meetings that go 3 hours, but I do take staff's comment to heart that we may find, as we divide up the work more, and we'll have a discussion on the subcommittees in a meeting in a minute, as well as we move forward away from the initial documents and issues we have to adopt, that we'll be able to get our work done more quickly. But I think whatever our start time, planning for 2 to 2.5 hours as a target is probably reasonable. We don't have to say that, I don't think, though, in the schedule, from my perspective at least. We just need the start time.
Does Pons need a second for his?
It ideally should. Thank you, Commissioner. Okay. I will ask for a vote on that motion unless there's further discussion, just to clarify that the motion will be to adopt the days that we have in the calendar before us, but to switch the time for every other meeting. I imagine we'll start next session with the alternate time on the 28th, 5:30. But I just want to see any further comments before we vote on a motion to adopt that calendar that would alternate between 2 o'clock and 5:30 start time every other Thursday. Commissioner Serban, sorry.
Is there any appetite among the commissioners to consider a start time of 19:30?
I don't see much right now, so I'll ask Commissioner Serban if it's okay. I'll ask everyone to think about that because we can easily amend this at the next meeting. Okay, but do consider it because I can see some advantage in that, especially for families, that it might be worth having 1 or 2 meetings at least with a later start. Commissioner Kugliak, I hope I didn't miss you too earlier. Sorry. Did you want to add in?
Oh, no, I was just saying I would have no problem with the 7:30 start time, but it ends up being once a month, so 5:30 will be fine for me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, without any other comment, Andrew, I'll ask you to call the roll on the motion. Again, 2 o'clock every other Thursday, 5:30 every other Thursday than that, with our next meeting on the 28th to start at 5:30.
Great, and I'll just note in terms of parliamentary procedure that this is a substitute motion to the original motion that had the draft calendar that was proposed. So with that substitute motion, Chair Bain, your vote, please.
Aye, and just to clarify for the record, this is the substitute motion offered by Commissioner Pond, seconded by Commissioner Inman. Thank you for that.
Wonderful, thank you. Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Katarina?
Aye.
Commissioner Chen? Commissioner Chen sounds like.
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Hit that unmute button, sorry.
No problem, thank you. Vice Chair Diaz?
Aye.
Commissioner Dostal?
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia?
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson?
Aye.
Commissioner Inman?
Aye.
Commissioner Kugliak?
Aye.
Commissioner Larson?
Aye.
Commissioner Pons?
Aye.
Commissioner Russ?
Aye.
Commissioner Serban?
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously with all commissioners being present and voting aye.
Thank you all very much. And thank you, Andrew, for the correction. And I'm sure we'll continue to find ways to make our meetings as accessible as possible and the agendas as accessible as possible. All right. We are now up to item 7, but we are also at 3:32. And we have at least one commissioner who has to leave at 4. So I just want to, first of all, make sure no one else has to leave at 4. Very good. The subcommittee we have a presentation to hear on, and on commission training, we have a list that I think will take some discussion, but we also have the competitive procurement issue. Without meaning to put any one commissioner over another, Commissioner Dostal, I did want to ask you if you have a preference besides just moving through the agenda as is, and I would, if you're okay with it, I would ask that we'll suspend the rules at the right moment or make a motion if needed to give you a chance to weigh in at, say, 3:50 on whatever hasn't been discussed that you may want to offer some thoughts on. That's one simple way to handle it. But I first and foremost, I wanted to see what you would like, given that you have to leave.
I'll defer to what you want to discuss first, if you want to go in the order or move around.
Okay. Any other feelings about moving forward along that line? All right, I'll ask commissioners to keep in mind that it is under our control how long we spend on any given agenda item. But we will go ahead, not seeing any objection, to item 7. I'll ask Barbara to make some opening comments and then ask our counsel, I think, I'm not sure if Marguerite or Hillary are giving the presentation. I think Hillary is on subcommittees, but let me turn it over to Barbara first.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just going to quickly mention that this is an informational presentation from IRC Council. Hillary is here to inform the Commission about subcommittees. Again, it's informational to be able to give the commissioners the necessary background to consider as you think through the different topics and this topic in particular. If the Commission desires to move further, an agenda item can be added to the future agenda to bring back or bring the formation of subcommittees before the Commission for consideration. So with that, I'd like to invite Hillary Gibson to present more information.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Barbara. Just to be mindful of the Commission's time, we will move through this quickly, and then if there are questions, we can take them at the end, and hopefully the Commission will find it fairly straightforward. As we've talked about in various other contexts, the Brown Act governs the Commission's actions. The question of subcommittees is no different. The Commission is permitted by statute to appoint subcommittees, but the statutory scheme governing the Redistricting Commission, as we've discussed, requires the Commission to comply with the Brown Act. If you could go to the next slide, Erin. The general rule is that a committee or other body of a local agency is subject to the Brown Act. This is generally the case whether that body is going to be temporary or permanent, whether it's decision-making or advisory. And this means that under the basic and general rule of the Brown Act, a subcommittee is covered and then therefore has to comply with all the notice, agenda, public meeting requirements of the Brown Act, unless a specific exception applies. So the relevant specific exception that we're talking about here is an exception for what is often referred to as an ad hoc subcommittee. The term ad hoc isn't used in the statute, but that's how you'll hear it referred to often by other bodies. There's a specific exemption in the Brown Act for an advisory committee, and we've underlined kind of the important terms here, the terms that are key to what makes a subcommittee qualify for this exception. So it's an advisory committee comprised solely of less than a quorum of members of the legislative body that created the advisory committee, the ad hoc subcommittee in this instance. These committees that meet all three of those requirements there are not covered by the Brown Act, which means that they can meet without the formal notice and agenda requirements and can also meet outside of a meeting that is open to the public and publicly noticed. And you know, the short answer, the bottom line on that is that an ad hoc committee can meet in private, whereas the full IRC and also a standing subcommittee, which we'll talk about on the next slide, cannot and is subject to all the requirements of the Brown Act. So I'm sorry, we'll talk about standing subcommittees on the slide following this one. We've got a little more about the ad hoc committees here. So ad hoc committees are committees that serve a limited or single purpose. They're temporary and they will dissolve once their specific task is completed. A common example that comes up frequently and that we see ad hoc committees formed for is to interview candidates for a vacant position. So they are formed for that limited purpose, they do their job, and then they're dissolved once the process is complete. We've got just a note of interest here, and since it has come up that the commissioners have requested information about points of comparison for the State Redistricting Commission, which is operating right now at the same time. The CRC is subject to the Bagley-Keene Act, which is slightly different and has different rules governing subcommittees. And under that act, if an advisory committee created by formal action of another body has only 2 members, it's not covered. So similar idea, different rules that govern the CRC. But in contrast with ad hoc committees, which are not subject to the notice and agenda and public meeting requirements of the Brown Act, are standing subcommittees. This specific and limited example that we've been talking about does not apply if the advisory committee, instead of being an ad hoc committee, is a standing committee. A standing committee is a committee that has a continuing subject matter jurisdiction, or if the committee's meeting schedule is fixed by charter, ordinance, resolution, or other formal action of the legislative body creating it. Formal action is a term that's generally construed broadly under the Brown Act. So if the commission, in the context of their discussion, decides to set a regular meeting schedule for, by motion, for example, for a committee that it sets up to deal with an ongoing subject matter such as the finances of the IRC or another matter that might be an ongoing concern for the IRC, that is something that would be considered a standing subcommittee and would be subject to all of the formal requirements of the Brown Act. And so a couple things just to note about standing committees. In addition to the compliance with all of the procedural requirements of the Brown Act and the open meeting requirements, which would include, the agenda, getting the agenda published, getting the meeting up on Zoom, taking public comment, etc. This standing committees would require the support of staff and legal counsel to facilitate compliance with all those various procedural requirements to make sure that we've checked all the boxes with respect to the Brown Act. That's all we've got for our presentation today. So if the commissioners have any discussion or questions, we'd be happy to answer them now.
Commissioner Inman.
Yes, so it sounds like it's important for an ad hoc committee to be advisory. I heard that term.
That's right.
And so can an ad hoc committee like spend money, command staff resources in the achievement of that goal? Or is it a self-contained, the ad hoc committee gets together, talk, and makes a recommendation?
So it doesn't need to be completely self-contained by commanding staff resources in terms of, it wouldn't command as many staff resources as a standing committee would, because it wouldn't require, the publication of an agenda and other things. But just the advisory requirement doesn't prevent an ad hoc committee from utilizing staff for support of certain items. But it would just be just inherently, because of the nature of the committee, be much less staff support than would be required for a standing committee.
So an example of an ad hoc committee could be something like an ad hoc committee to decide or determine if we need a standing committee, a standing budget committee. That could be an ad hoc committee that looks at that and makes a recommendation.
Right. You wouldn't be deciding or determining anything because it would be an advisory body, but you would be going kind of offline to discuss that particular question and come back and make a recommendation or provide some information to the full commission, so the commission as a body could make the decision.
Okay, thank you.
I have Commissioner Krugliak next, and then any others with clarifying questions? Seeing none, Commissioner Krugliak, please.
I think this is kind of the same thing, but in your particular example about an interview committee, they're not hiring the candidate. They're just telling the hiring manager who they would pick. Is that kind of the differentiation between advisory versus making a decision?
Right. They're just, they are kind of taking some of the tasks that are part of the process offline to complete them in theoretically a more efficient manner, right? To take just a few people offline, do something kind of quickly, and then report back to the full commission, or in a certain instance staff, but to report back for your purposes, likely the full commission, with a recommendation or the results of their interviews, so the full commission can make a decision.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm specifically asking about that because it seemed like it had a very clear parallel to the RFP process, but your comment is that it actually doesn't, because there aren't really decisions being made by that interview panel.
No,
it's only kind of reporting back.
I think that that observation is well taken, Commissioner, and I think that is a better example for the Commission's purposes. Is that the example in this context, in the context of the RFP process, for example, is you could have an advisory subcommittee that goes offline, that interviews, for example, potential contractors, and then reports back to the full commission for the actual decision making about the hiring of the contractors. So that is the more relevant example perhaps for the commission than an interview process for personnel, for example.
Commissioner Kuglak, is that answer your concerns right then? Good. I see Commissioner Serban, and then I think we'll move to public comment. Commissioner Serban?
Could you clarify the portion where there was a short line about the Bagley-Keene exemption and its application to the CRC? Is that that piece of it, does that apply to us in any way, or is that Bagley-Keene exemption thing only applied to the CRC?
That's right. It applies to state bodies, so it wouldn't, it was just provided as a point of information, a kind of, to the extent that commissioners are looking and saying, why is the CRC maybe doing certain things differently, or why have they structured their subcommittees to involve only 2 people? It's because they are subject to some slightly different rules that have kind of the same intent and similar exceptions, but are not exactly the same as the Brown Act exceptions that the commission is subject to.
Okay.
Very good. Unless there are any other clarifying questions, Andrew, do we have any requests for public comment?
There are no requests to speak on this item, Chair Bain.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. As Barbara said, there's no specific action recommended by staff for us to take today. We could theoretically make a decision or have a motion that we would approve to take this up as an action item on our next meeting. We could consider a motion to form a couple of subcommittees, at least in principle, and to ask some commissioners to do some thinking about it before the next meeting. Frankly, I wanted to see what the commission thought, especially given the time and that we still have 2 additional items to do. If someone would like to make a motion, please feel free. I'll ask Vice Chair Diaz, then I'll have Commissioner Serban, then I'll have Commissioner Brown.
I would say, thank you, Chair. I would say in the interest of time, because we have some pretty important items coming up, I would not make a motion at this time. I wouldn't recommend it, since I think this is something we can stew on for a little bit, and I know there's some definite needs for this commission to form committees, especially now that we know we have a better sense of what the timeline is going to be. So I don't know if this would be a motion, but if we could maybe just, and it's already an informational item, so I don't think there's a motion needed at this point.
Not to continue, at least as I understand it. And before I allow anybody else to speak, Ms. Gibson, I apologize. Thank you very much for an efficient but thorough presentation. I should have offered that at the beginning. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Commissioner Serban, then Commissioner Brown, just for comments right now on whether we need a motion, please. Commissioner Serban.
So looking at the agenda, it looks to me that we're considering possible action. So maybe this is a action item. So I mean, I don't think it would be out of order to consider some action resulting from this agenda item. I also think that given our timeline, given the amount of public comment that we received with regard to receiving education and training, and given the critical importance of receiving that information and training in order to guide us moving forward in the thing that we're doing, I wouldn't be opposed to entertaining a motion to create a ad hoc subcommittee to explore that specific task of exploring what it is our training options are, and how we're going to do this, how we're going to train ourselves into doing this thing. Just because I think that's kind of the critical task in front of us right now. And I also wouldn't be opposed to entertaining a motion to create a ad hoc subcommittee that would just be formed to consider what subcommittees would be appropriate, like I think Commissioner Inman was sort of alluding to. So thank you for that.
Okay, let me ask you to hold on that thought. I hear a motion in there or 2, but let me give Commissioner Brown a chance first. Commissioner Brown?
I'm kind of going along the same lines, but I'm thinking that maybe our discussion on whether we should try to vote to have a subcommittee should occur after the competitive procurement process gets discussed today, because then we'll know whether we actually need a committee for that and get started on that. And then we can add other subcommittees as we go. But that one, the training sounded good too. So we can maybe do both of those at the same time, or put it on the agenda at least for the next time, if we don't have to jump on it right away. Anyhow, I think it should be put off for a little bit, if not the end of this session or beginning of next session.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry, beginning of the next meeting we have on the 28th.
Yeah. Mhm.
All right.
I don't know how important it is that we have that subcommittee between now and the next 2 weeks. It doesn't seem like it's pressing too much, but we'll find out when we hear about the competitive procurement process.
Thank you for that. Other comments? Commissioner Serban, let me offer a thought. Would it be useful from your perspective that you just explained to have a motion to have an ad hoc subcommittee that would meet sometime between now and the 28th to look at subcommittees and to provide us a list for the next meeting? Would that answer at least some of the concern that you were expressing, or the issue?
Yes, I think so.
And what I would request is that, not to put it on you, but since you made the proposal, perhaps you could work with staff to find a time between now and the 28th and ask staff to invite all commissioners, because it's an ad hoc meeting. I want to check with staff and Hillary that it would be okay if it's a one-time ad hoc meeting. Do we have to keep it less than a majority of members?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So that it has to be, you can make a decision at this meeting as to who will be part of that subcommittee. Since it's just going to be an ad hoc that meets once, it's not going to have a fixed meeting schedule, so that's okay. But it does have to be less than a quorum, less than a majority of members would.
Right. Commissioner Inman, I'm calling you in just a second. What I would ask people to think about a little bit is whether we want to decide membership now, or just have people express interest and staff can do some sort of quick review, or simply draw randomly from those who expressed interest, and that would be the ad hoc committee. Commissioner Inman.
That was exactly what I was going to say. Express interest to staff, staff do a random draw, limit it to, I don't know, 3 or 4.
Yeah.
First random draw is the chair of the subcommittee, something like that.
The committee can figure out in itself who the chair can be or something.
Good. Commissioner Pons.
I just propose that we allow the staff to come up with a list of potential subcommittees based on history. And then we can select at the next meeting if we think that subcommittee is necessary. And looking at the discussion regarding training in the IRP process, at the end of these next 2 issues on the agenda, if we think a subcommittee is necessary, we can make a proposal then, here and now, to stand up a subcommittee to further look at the issues of training and the IRP process. But I wouldn't want to stand up a subcommittee to determine a list of subcommittees. I think that's a staff responsibility, and they can bring it to us, the potential subcommittees that could possibly be selected.
Other comments on that? I don't want to hog the floor myself. Commissioner Serban.
I agree with Commissioner Pons. I think the way to do it would be to do something like asking staff for maybe a benchmarks, maybe to benchmark again what other redistricting commissions have done, like what committees maybe the CRC has created or other county redistricting commissions. So I don't think we are either this ad hoc commission, or committee, or us as a committee ourselves are going to have to really do a lot of thinking as to what committees we can create. We just have to really look at the suggestions from staff.
Excellent. Other comments on that?
I just wanted to just a point of clarification. The committees that Commissioner Serban initially brought up were ad hoc committees that would just go off and do something kind of one time, or, and be advisory committees. A lot of the committees that have been brought up in public comment or other places that the CRC has constituted, for example, are standing committees. And so are committees that would have a regular meeting schedule and a continuing jurisdiction, and therefore be subject to all of the Brown Act procedural requirements that we've discussed, and the corresponding demand on staff and legal time to facilitate those. So just a point of clarification as to what the commissioners would like brought back to it in terms of recommendations, if there are specific issues that maybe would benefit from an ad hoc subcommittee meeting, or more information about standing subcommittees.
Commissioner Brown, then Commissioner Serban.
What if we had an ad hoc committee that was initially going to come up with whatever it is that we're looking at, but it became a standing committee because we needed to have them be longer term and have a lot more information? Does that cross any borders there as far as, do we move from ad hoc, which is okay to not be under Brown Act, to standing commissions when we decide to make it a standing committee, I mean? And then that's when we're under the Brown Act rules, or does it make a difference?
Typically, you would just do that at a meeting. So there would be, you have your ad hoc committee, for example, that is gone to discuss something or come up with a recommendation or some information for the commission. And in reporting back, it may be decided that the work of that committee really needs to be continuing. And there needs to be ongoing discussions or information gathering or what have you by that committee. And at that point, a regular meeting schedule would be set, and it would become a standing subcommittee that would be subject to those Brown Act requirements. But to the question, just because it started as an ad hoc committee, if it becomes, given an ongoing subject matter and or regular meeting schedule, a standing committee, it does become subject to the Brown Act.
Commissioner Dostal, I know we're approaching your time. I haven't forgotten. Commissioner Serban?
So I would just comment that, Hillary, thank you for asking the clarifying question. I think the formation of an ad hoc subcommittee to tackle this matter is the reason why, let's have this conversation about what do we want from staff and all that. That's better. We can have that conversation as a subcommittee outside of this meeting, and so we can just move on. That's kind of why I think we should, the subcommittee idea is, I think, the ideal way to move forward with this.
Other comments? All right. Let me offer commissioners a minute or two to think about which they would like, an ad hoc committee or a simple tasking to staff. While you're thinking about it, I'll ask Commissioner Dostal if there are any particular points on this agenda item or on the rest of the agenda that she wants to make sure we have in mind before she departs.
Thank you for that opportunity. Sorry, there's a helicopter. No, thank you. I would just say that on the committees, if there's going to be something that's going to come up with something next week, I wouldn't be available for that. So I think, if you have volunteers, I'm okay with either one, whether it's a subcommittee or not, but I just want to point out I wouldn't be available for that. So.
I did want to ask you very specifically, because I think it's going to emerge in the conversation. Did you have anything you wanted to offer on the procurement issue, and specifically whether you had a preference on option 1 or option 2, or another thought about it?
No, I wanted to hear the presentation, so I have not formed an opinion about that yet.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry to put you on the spot on that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so with that in mind, my sense is there's enough interest in an ad hoc committee that should be the motion we consider. So I'll ask for a motion on whether we should form an ad hoc committee to look at subcommittees between now and the January 20th meeting.
So moved.
Do we have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
From Commissioner Serban, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Commissioner Brown. Any comments on it? Very good.
I do.
I'm sorry.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
Commissioner West, then Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I just think maybe it's a bit premature. And I'm not sure the necessity of it.
Okay.
Was there an option to, that you said, I think, to have staff look into the subcommittees we might want to put together?
Yes. And I'm treating this as if we don't have a subcommittee, we will assign it to staff.
Okay. Just the irony of a subcommittee on subcommittee seems so bureaucratic to me. Okay, thank you.
You are hearing my United Nations experience creep into this. I apologize. Any other comments on the motion? Okay. Andrew, I'll ask you to call the roll with the implicit understanding that a vote no is not just a vote against an ad hoc committee, but is a vote that we agree to task staff to come up with a list and consideration of implications as has been discussed. Andrew, is that okay under our rules?
That would be fine. I just wanted to clarify for the motion, is there a selection process that would like to be included in this motion for the ad hoc subcommittee?
The selection process, I think, would be as discussed, which is commissioners who are interested would submit it to staff and there would be a random drawing, as Commissioner Inman, I think, explained better than I.
How many members of are we proposing?
Commissioner Serban, there was discussion at one point of 4. Would that make sense for your motion?
Probably should be an odd number.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think so too.
3 or 5, I think, would be available. I wouldn't go beyond 5.
Yeah.
Point of clarification. Sorry, are we referring back to our bylaws on the formation of these? Because that could be the guiding.
Right. On ad hoc committees, I think we have a lot of flexibility. I'll ask staff and council if there's anything specific in mind, but off the top of my head, I don't think there's any specific rules that other than we're allowed to.
I'm looking really quickly.
Me too.
I have a quick question.
I'm
for you.
doing the same, Barbara and Andrew.
Commissioner Brown, go ahead.
So we're voting on whether we should form an ad hoc committee to decide what other committees we might need, standing committees, or give that duty over to staff.
Right. A
Right.
yes vote is to form an ad hoc committee of 5.
Mhm.
A no vote would still include, unless some explicit comment to the contrary, but I didn't hear any objection. So a no vote would mean we would not have an ad hoc committee, but we would ask staff to consider all this and report back. And then, of course, as I think you, Commissioner Ponce, and others have said, we would incorporate into that tasking any further comments that come in other agenda items today. The RFP process in particular. Commissioner Serban?
So if there is no ad hoc committee that's formed and this task is given to staff to report back to the commission, what
do we do?
Would individual commissioners be able to like communicate with staff and work with staff on their own to try to to explore this to sort of explore this topic further? I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is is it maybe do we need a subcommittee? Because I'm thinking the point of the subcommittee is to serve as sort of a stand-in for the IRC in communicating to staff and refining the information that we get from the staff. But do we need that? Do we need a body that does that? Is what I'm wondering.
I take Commissioner Russ's earlier comment on that. I think it would be perfectly acceptable to have a process where staff would create a document with input, just as is available on any issue, from individual commissioners communicating with staff, because I know staff will want as much input from commissioners as possible. Staff would provide us with information in a briefing as an agenda item at our next meeting, and we could then decide either to approve whatever's on the table as is, or come up with a recommendation in that meeting, or quite possibly form an ad hoc subcommittee at that point, even if it becomes a little more bureaucratic. That would be my take. I want to take Commissioner Inman, but I didn't want to speak for council or staff. Do you Counselor, staff, any comment on that?
So on the one note, I just, and I apologize for maybe not tracking this 100%, so I'm trying to keep up, but it is what I'm hearing that we add this as an agenda item to the future for next meeting, and that staff be prepared to come back to discuss, maybe this could be an item we discuss a little bit more in depth since this was an informational item, and talk a little bit more about some possible recommendations. Staff didn't want to come forward with a list of subcommittees per se, but now that we have some direction, we can come back with those thoughts so that there could be more time to talk around ad hocs and subcommittees, and then also defer to Hillary. If I didn't find any language specific to that, Hillary, did you?
No, nor did I. And I think Commissioner Boehm, to your question, there's nothing about the specific issue of subcommittees that requires it to be treated differently than any normal agenda item. So if it's going to be brought back as an agenda item for the next meeting, it would just proceed as does any other agenda item.
And the only clarification I would add to what Barbara just said is that during that process over the next 2 weeks, any commissioner on an individual basis could be in touch with staff with any thoughts or suggestions or comments they have. Commissioner Inman, sorry.
You just said what I was going to say. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Serban?
So from staff's perspective, what is an easier workflow process for staff, for individual commissioners to participate in this thing, in that sort of spontaneous, organic way? Or would it be a preferred is the preferred process to have a designated body, like a subcommittee with which you're interfacing?
So at this point, because what I'm hearing is maybe that there needs to be a little bit more time either to think about it, and I'll maybe also look at the presentation that Hillary provided, bringing it forth as an agenda item for next meeting where we can maybe focus more on it and folks have thought about it, and or hear any suggestions. It's not that it's a less or more workflow, Commissioner Serban. I think it's just maybe would address the topic in a little bit more in depth.
And Barbara, just to add on to that, perhaps as we've moved through the remainder of today's agenda and some of these kind of meatier issues that the commission is going to have to begin tackling, commissioners will have more thoughts at the next meeting about what issues they may require a subcommittee for and which issues are best to be continued to be dealt with by the full commission.
Commissioner Brown?
I have a quick question. In my mind, I'm thinking that staff would have a lot more resources available to itself and knowledge of what the former subcommittees and committees or ad hoc committees were. And if they can kind of pull that together and give that information to us as a commission, then we can decide which ones we think we need to have as ad hocs or standing commissions. I mean, standing committees. So I say give it to the staff for this week and then have them come back with that data for us to look at next time.
Any other comments? Very good. Andrew, I want to ask, because I think we're now headed towards just tasking the staff, is that preferably done as an amended motion, or should we just simply have the motion withdrawn and staff will take that as a tasking?
I think the preference is that direction to staff be made by motion and vote, just so it's clear that that is the direction to staff. So at this point, we do have a motion on the floor, so that motion certainly could be amended or there could be a substitute motion made.
Commissioner Serban, would you like to amend the motion or?
Let's just it'd be cleaner to just do a substitute motion, and the motion would be to request that staff report back to the commission with suggested ad hoc and permanent or standing committees, and hopefully that's done through a review of other similar bodies in California.
So we could add something like with due regard and review of other commissions in California, as well as implications for commission resources. How's that?
Sure.
Okay.
And Commissioner Servant, since you made the initial motion, you certainly can just amend your motion. And so this will be the motion on the floor at this point. But Commissioner Brown did second that. So if Commissioner Brown is comfortable with those amendments, then we can retain her as a second, or she can withdraw her second.
Okay, so we have a motion as just explained by Commissioner Serban and a second from Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Diaz, did you want to comment? Okay. Is there any discussion on the substitute motion? Seeing none, I'll ask Andrew to call the roll.
Great, thank you. Chair Boehme?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Katerina?
Aye.
Commissioner Chen?
Aye.
Vice Chair Diaz?
Aye.
Commissioner Dostal? Commissioner Garcia?
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson?
Aye.
Commissioner Inman?
Aye.
Commissioner Kruglia?
Aye.
Commissioner Larson?
Aye.
Commissioner Pons?
Aye.
Commissioner Russ?
Aye.
Commissioner Serban?
Aye.
That motion passes with all commissioners who are present voting aye, and I'll note for the record that Commissioner Dostal is absent. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for the discussion. We'll now move on to agenda item 8, discussion and possible direction or provide direction on commission training. Before we begin, I'd like to make sure people are aware ahead of time. You have a paper on this. I will very likely ask as soon as we're done with the initial review for a motion to approve this list as a initial starting point and frame the discussion under those terms. I don't want to prejudge anything, but I would like to have that as at least as the initial way we're going to move forward and have you at least considering that. So for that, Barbara, let me ask you to offer some opening comments.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And again, yes, reiterating and very similar to what we did with the timeline is this is a proposed list of training topics developed by staff as requested by the commissioners at the last meeting. And this is a starting point for your consideration. They're very general subject areas that we've identified that could be significant to your work. If the commissioners approve it, what we'd like to do is go back and flesh out the list with more specific presentations, materials, tie in the relevant speakers, because there's been discussion about also tying in those relevant speakers, and then even tying in the review of lessons learned. So for example, budget is one area. There could be a presentation on budget. We could connect lessons learned from prior redistricting and then also bring in the speakers and any additional training. So it'd sort of be like a package around budget. And so at this point, there's not a formal presentation. We did submit the list that's been initially identified. And with that, we're open to all ideas and direction of the commission, and I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you. I'll ask for clarifying questions first. I see Commissioner Pons, Commissioner Hanson. We'll start with them. Commissioner Pons, please.
No, I was going to make a recommendation to the commission to adapt the topics as is, and then to establish a standing committee to further expand and evaluate the topics for training going forward.
Okay, we will take that under advisement in just a moment. Commissioner Hanson.
There were two terms that I saw used not only in this list, but also in the timeline. And they were lessons learned, which you've said, and things that we could be doing on our own. And would it be possible for us to get some concrete examples of resources for that even before we have outside staff come in? I know you can find out a lot about the process just by Googling it, but we don't want to depend only on Google for what we learn. And so I would appreciate some guidance on how I could proceed on my own without having to wait for a formal presentation.
Thank you. Commissioner Serban.
Oh, thank you. So Commissioner Hanson brings up a good point. I was just looking at the CRC's website and ended up getting in touch with the California State employee who has access to the archived CRC materials, and he provided me with their lessons learned publication or something, that the thing that they made. And so I'm kind of curious, like, so that kind of thing, it seems like all of us should probably have access to that, or at least. So I'm hoping to to echo Commissioner Hansen's sentiment that maybe we could obtain other reports of similar nature.
Barbara, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. And I also want to clarify that some of these trainings, some of them will be on your own, of course, and we're happy to, if directed by the staff, to come back with that additional detail. Also providing reports. I also wanted to mention that some of these trainings, we may want to do it in publicly at the IRC meeting for the benefit of our public as well, for our community. So there's that combination, including lessons learned. What were the differences between last redistricting? What are some of those reports out there? What trainings can be done on your own? So if this is the direction and this list looks good to the commissioners, then staff can go back and do all of that.
Any other clarifying questions? Commissioner Larson.
Well, I guess I have 3 points. There was nothing in the list here on the budget, and I think that should at least be another bullet. We talked in one of our earlier meetings about other redistricting committees that are ongoing right now. I think in light of the uncertainty of the census itself and when that information may come and how that may be challenged, which really impacts us severely, we ought to have some way of getting their current experience also, and what they're going through these same issues that we're going through. Maybe we can share some information. And thirdly, I'd like something about the Register of Voters. What are they actually going to do with our data? And how can we help them do whatever they have to do? Those are my comments.
Thank you for that. Not seeing any other clarifying questions. Andrew or staff, do we have any requests for public comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have 2 requests to speak on this item, and I'll invite Janine Ericat to address the commission, and she'll have 3 minutes to address the commission.
Thank you all again for the opportunity to speak again. First, I wanted to thank the county staff for putting together such a comprehensive training outline. I just have 2 suggestions on the matter. One is that I would ask the commission to begin the trainings as soon as possible, because what you learn through your training will inform your decisions and discussions about your timeline, the formulation of RFPs for the line drawer and the outreach RFP, and the ultimate decisions you make about which consultants you hire. We'd also encourage you to add your training a slot for speakers from other independent commissions to find out what was helpful or not helpful to them as they started their processes. So again, much of what you're already discussing and have brought up, just wanted to uplift that and really stress the importance of trainings to help inform your decisions. Thank you all.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Kim Knox to address the commission.
Hi, thank you. I'm Kim Knox on behalf of the League of Women Voters of San Diego. Now, I again want to thank county staff for putting together the comprehensive training outline. And my suggestions are to start the training ASAP, because what you learn through your training will inform your discussions and decisions about your timeline, the formulation of RFPs for the line drawer and the outreach RFP, and the ultimate decisions you make about which consultants you will hire. We'd also like to encourage you to add to your training a slot for speakers from other independent commissions, as has been stated, to find out what was helpful or not helpful to them as they start their processes. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes public communication on this item, Mr. Chair.
Good. Before I formally move to discussion or requesting amendment, Vice Chair Diaz, I'm sorry, I saw your hand up after I referred. Did you have something you wanted to say now?
No, I'll wait till discussion.
Okay, very good. The concept for this agenda item is to adopt this list, as Barbara explained, for further discussion. I'd certainly be willing to entertain a motion to that effect or another motion if people are so interested.
I would move to adopt.
Okay, motion from Commissioner Katerina to adopt. Do we have a
I'll
second?
second it. Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, Commissioner Brown, second. So we can go to discussion. Vice Chair Diaz, Commissioner Krugliak, Commissioner Serban. We'll start with you three. Vice Chair Diaz?
Yes, I'm not sure if this is already made clear in this outline that we're looking at today, but I just wanted to let the public know that as we choose speakers for these trainings, in particular, if we're asking people who, from other commissions, that we think thoughtfully about that we have a balanced, Republican, Democrat, and nonpartisan, so that we think about that in advance. So that's just all I wanted to comment on.
Thank you. Commissioner Krugliak?
Thank you. I would support the motion to approve the list as is, but potentially formally add on budget as was requested. Also, I'm quite curious about the lawsuits that I know have occurred after redistricting maps in the past. So I would like to understand those lawsuits in detail to understand what the complaints have been previously. I think it would also be very good that when we approve this very soon, the training is prioritized, because I think this is a big list that we definitely should address and understand, but I think some of these are going to be important to get to sooner rather than later, probably especially around communities of interest, public outreach, really understanding minority communities and making sure that we reach out to them appropriately. I think that should be on the docket very, very early. So I would suggest maybe adding a few more bullets formally to this list, and then adopting with those additions.
Do you have any beyond the ones you just stated to add, that you'd like to add to the list now?
I think I did, but those are the only two that I can remember at this moment.
Okay, very good. I have Commissioner Serban, then I think I have Vice Chair Diaz again. Commissioner Serban?
So I'm sorry, I think I might have missed it. Did the motion include a request for staff to also explore the sources of where we would get the training?
That's what I heard as part of the clarification from Barbara. Barbara, do I have that right?
We have the relevant presentation, guest speakers, review of lessons learned from past redistricting, with those additional details being provided. So very similar to the timeline. I would also indicate that this is a fluid document. This is an initial go for it, and then continue to bring back and provide that information. If I can just may add one thing, one approach also might be is, since the timeline has been approved by all of you, we could coordinate the training and the speakers to follow along that timeline, in addition to any specific requests, like I believe for the discussion's been around budget. So it would be budget, and then any of the other requests that would follow the timeline, if that's so desired.
Okay. Also, some public comment has suggested that some of the folks who've contributed to some of the folks from the public who have contributed to our discussion so far have access to excuse me have access to the training resources that we might consider. So I'd encourage the conversation with those folks as well. And one other question, I guess maybe this is better directed to staff, is with that. So for example, this publication from the CRC, is that something that I can just email to my fellow commissioners? But I guess the answer to that is no, because then that's like a serial meeting, right? So do I just email that to maybe the chair or to Barbara to distribute to the rest of us? Can I send the link right now in the chat?
Hillary, if it's in the chat right now, it's public, right? So
Yeah, I
that-
mean, we're in a public meeting, but the normal protocol for this kind of stuff would be to send it to staff and just have everything go through staff that you want them to consider for the for putting together the next agenda. And so that's generally the best way to you know, bring that information forward.
Okay.
Vice Chair Diaz.
Sorry, that was an error on my part. I didn't have anything to say. I think I forgot to lower my hand.
It's something I do constantly, so not a problem. I will just, oh, Commissioner Russ, please.
Yeah. I'm just looking up here, and I want to recommend for your reading enjoyment the August 25th, 2011 Redistricting Commission report that is online. It's 33 pages, very interesting. It doesn't have all the, it's only 33 pages, and I'm sure there's a lot more data behind it and things like that that we're going to get into, but it's out there, and it's very informative. So for self-education.
Thank you for that. And I do think that will be part of our discussion going forward, because I think all of us have found things that we find useful and we'd like to share. And as Hillary just explained, and Barbara, I think finding a way to send that to staff and maybe they can post it. Certainly, I would hope it would be available to the public because I want them to know what we're looking at and encourage them to provide us with some inputs. I think that works smoothly, but thank you for that. Before we go too much farther, I just had a couple of comments related to what I've already heard. Commissioner Pons, I have not forgotten your idea to establish a committee or subcommittee on this, but I would suggest let's wait for our next meeting and consider that once we have more of the list and more information from staff, if that's okay with you. Good.
That's fine with me.
Great. Commissioner Garcia, I have not forgotten the importance of us finding a way to train together, work together, and maybe even get to know each other in this wonderful virtual world we live in. So I hope you'll feel free to send some ideas on that, but I do want to make sure we don't lose track of that aspect of training and gaining experience. And with that, somebody mentioned lessons learned. I did want at this point to just chime in and remind, please keep your notes on this because we will, as we go through all these meetings, we will want to gather them and make a report to our successors in 2031. Commissioner Brown, sorry.
I just have a quick question that this list that we're looking at isn't the only training that we're going to be available for. It's just the beginning of the training kind of, and we can add to it at any point in time as needed. That's my understanding, hopefully.
Correct. I didn't want to jump ahead of you, Chair Bain.
No, I think I'd agree with what Barbara said earlier from that perspective. I do think we would probably want to review a proposal to organize training and not just have a commissioner say, I think we need training on X and it just goes. We would want to have a commission discussion of it. Mm-hmm. But I think we'd be wide open and I would bet we will find things we need or want more training on or more discussion of as we go along. I also have in mind that revised timeline and all the evolution that's going on will alter both the prioritization that Commissioner Kruglack so well discussed, as well as giving us some other opportunities where we may find during one training moment that opens the door to another kind of training that might be useful. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a dynamic process, and I think we'll certainly have chances to change it. Okay. So with that in mind, I'll consider then we have now I've lost track. Do we have a motion on the table to this effect?
We do. We have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Caterina, seconded by Commissioner Brown, to adopt the training schedule as proposed. I do note that there were some discussion about adding to that list.
Right. So do we need a substitute motion on that or just an amended motion to absorb at least the things that Commissioner Kruglack and others have added?
Certainly, it would be fine for the maker of the motion to amend the existing motion.
Okay. Yes, I will amend my motion to approve the initial list and include the topics that were discussed, including budget and legal lawsuits.
I'll second that.
So that is the motion on the table. Any further discussion? Andrew, I'll ask you to call the roll for a vote.
Great, thank you. Chair Bame,
Aye.
Commissioner Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Katarina,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Vice Chair Diaz,
Aye.
Commissioner Dostal, Commissioner Garcia,
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson,
Aye.
Commissioner Inman,
Aye.
Commissioner Krugliak,
Aye.
Commissioner Larson,
Aye.
Commissioner Pons.
Nay.
Pardon me, Mr. Pons?
No. Nay.
Okay. Commissioner Russ,
Aye.
Commissioner Serban.
Aye.
That motion passes with Commissioner Pons voting no and Commissioner Dostal absent, all other commissioners voting aye.
Very good. Thank you for that. We will now move on to item 9, update discussion and possible action on competitive procurement process for demographic/mapping services and public outreach services. I'll turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you, Chair Bame. Good afternoon, Commissioner. So at the December 18th, 2020 meeting, the IRC.
Sorry, Barbara, can we pause? Commissioner Garcia, did you have something you wanted to raise right now?
Yes, and it's not, it actually has nothing to do with the next agenda item, but and it may be something that we want to agenda for the future, but I'd like to bring it up now. And that is that we have been taking these votes in a very standard order and always in the same order. And as the topics and the issues that we have to discuss become maybe a little bit thornier, I'm wondering if we could consider changing up the order in which we take the votes. So I don't know when is a good time to bring up that topic and if we need to discuss it further, but I'd like to just put that on the table for now, and then we can proceed with the agenda. Sorry about that.
No. I appreciate you weighing in on that right now, because it's always better, I think, to hear those things immediately after the relevant moment happened. I will ask staff to be thinking about that, and if at all possible, we'll try to talk about that during future agenda items as to whether we need to have a full discussion on it or some staff recommendation on it. We'll go from there. Barbara, I apologize for interrupting you. That's my fault for not seeing Commissioner Garcia's hand. Please continue.
Absolutely. The December 18th meeting, we did the presentation. It was an informational item on a process for the county retaining certain specialized services for demographic and mapping and public outreach and engagement under the county standard procurement process. The IRC discussed this process quite at length and requested that the staff research and provide information at a meeting regarding the feasibility of alternative approaches that would increase IRC involvement as well as increase opportunities for public input. So staff has discussed quite in depth with council, and we really, what we're hoping to present to you today is a balance that would ensure the mandate of the Brown Act, that legislative bodies deliberate and make public decisions in open meeting be balanced with the confidentiality that's required of decision-making, that's a feature of the county standard procurement process, and also the desire of the IRC to have that increased participation in process and transparency. In addition to the recommended alternative approaches, the IRC also asked for information on the reasoning for combining the demographic and mapping software services. They also inquired about the inclusion of small and minority business in the procurements, subcontractors, translation services, a comparison of other redistricting commission procurement processes, and all of those items were included in the staff report. And we again are of course available to answer any additional questions that you have on those topics. And what we'd like to do here is talk about the two alternative approaches. And so I'm going to turn it over to Liberty Donnelly, my co-manager for the county redistricting project, to do an alternative of those two processes. Liberty?
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Chair Bame. Liberty?
Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Liberty. I'm one of the co-managers for the redistricting process, providing support to you all. Today, I'd like to give you an overview of the county's recommendation for alternative approaches for the procurement process. To be honest, based on your guys' great feedback we received on the desire for more IRC and public involvement, staff really had to think outside the box and develop a whole new procurement process to fit this unique situation. It required multiple discussions and a lot of research, but we were able to develop two innovative options that are very transparent and have taken into account the commissioner's feedback. The following two new options are presented for the IRC's consideration. The first option being brought forth to the commission recommends that the full IRC in public meetings develop key aspects of each RFP, which include a statement of work, evaluation criteria, submittal questions for offers, budgetary requirements, and any other additional items needed, with the input of Department of Purchasing and Contracting to ensure that the RFP meets the county's standards for public contracting. Based on your feedback, staff is also recommending an industry day for each of the RFPs. An industry day will give the public an additional opportunity to see a presentation of the services needed and give feedback and input with respect to procurements prior to the posting of the RFP to the public. The industry day is meant to serve as an informational and feedback session with the goal of soliciting input to be incorporated as applicable into the RFP. In addition, since development of the RFP will be conducted at public meetings, the public will have multiple opportunities to provide input on the drafting of the RFPs. After the development of the RFP, an SSC made up of solely county subject matter expert staff would evaluate the proposals received in accordance with the RFP evaluation criteria developed by the IRC. The SSC evaluation process will be conducted in a confidential setting in accordance with the county's standardized RFP process. In short, this option really tries to attempt to balance the IRC's desire for increased participation and transparency regarding the IRC's role in the process with the benefits of keeping the selection process confidential. I have provided a sample timeline in the staff report for this option, which basically recommends that the commission create and develop the RFP, including the statement of work, evaluation criteria, budgetary and submittal requirements in at least 3 of your current public commission meetings, anticipating 2 hours of discussion for 2 of the meetings. The IRC could call for additional IRC meetings if more discussion is needed or to advance the timeline. If there are delays, we expect that contracts, if there are no delays, we expect that contracts will be effective by late April. For option 2, the IRC would pursue an alternative RFP process under the guidance of DPC that could be conducted almost entirely in the public. That would allow the IRC the most flexibility to determine how to structure its participation in the procurement process, but would not include the confidentiality of the selection process provided by option 1, except as to cost. If the IRC determines to pursue this option, the IRC may wish to convene an advisory subcommittee composed less than a majority of members of the IRC to discuss the options for structuring the procurement and report back to the full IRC at its next regular meeting so that the full IRC can determine how to proceed. An anticipated sample timeline for this option, utilizing components similar to those of the state of California procurement process for redistricting consultants, which is completed publicly, is as follows. This timeline recommends that the commission, like option 1, create and develop the RFP, including the statement of work, evaluation criteria, budgetary and submittal requirements, in at least 3 of your current public commission meetings, anticipating 2 hours of discussion for 2 of the meetings. In addition, an industry day would also be part of the process that I described earlier. What makes this different and a little unique is that the IRC would also need to participate in a minimum of 4 special IRC meetings in April to evaluate the proposal submissions, which we are estimating 4 to 8 hours of discussion at each meeting. In addition, if presentations of proposals are requested to gain more insight or to get clarification, additional special IRC meetings will be needed and will delay the timeline. This would also require an advisory committee to be created for the review of the cost proposal and potentially other items that contractors may deem proprietary. And if there are no delays, contracts would be effective by May. The projected impacts on the sample procurement timeline may limit the number of contractors willing to participate given other commitments. While it cannot be known with any certainty, the public review of proposals could discourage contractors from participating to avoid disparagement, for example, at the instigation of a competitor. In addition, there could be delays as this is a unique procurement approach for the county, and the sheer logistics will need to be addressed and developed. Lastly, there would be additional costs associated with having special meetings for translation and legal counsel services. As mentioned, we provided 2 alternative procurement options for the commission, and depending on the action taken today and other potential impacts, staff may need to adjust the timeline and present at a future IRC meeting. This concludes my presentation on alternative options for the procurement, and I will turn it back to Barbara.
So I know, commissioners, that was a lot of information, and thank you, Liberty, for all your help and for putting up this chart. As you look at this, the significant difference gets when you get after the industry day. So it on the option 1, it's pretty much the SSC, or the Sole Selection Committee work that's done through the county standard process, versus option 2, where you're actually doing that as part of the RFP process, creating the RFP, ranking the RFPs, and doing that in the public process. So I think this is aggressive timeline, quite frankly, for both of these. This is something that we haven't done before, but we're committed, and I'll just turn it back over to the chair for further discussion, and Liberty and I are available for any questions.
Good. I will ask Aaron or whoever's sharing the screen to, thank you very much, so that I can see everyone and hands in particular. All right, so we need to have clarifying questions first, and I really would request that we focus just on clarifying questions for now. We still have to get public comment, and then we'll have, I promise, a good thorough discussion. So I have Commissioner Inman, Vice Chair Diaz, and Commissioner Krugliak. Commissioner Inman, please.
Thanks. Question about the industry day. Who does that? Who is doing that presentation? And is the IRC, is that an IRC special meeting? What is that industry day, I guess? And who does it?
So the industry day, and correct me if I'm wrong, Liberty, for option 1, the industry day, staff could hold the industry day. That would be open to the public, to the community, and that could include the IRC members. It would not be part of a regular IRC meeting.
Yeah, and also DPC would be involved. Hillary may have, she had put in the timeline, it could potentially be noticed depending on how many commissioners attended. But we could always deal with those details unless Hillary has something to add to that.
And then the other question is the SSC that's formed under option 1 is only county staff. So I would assume that you would be bringing in people who are expert in the field that we're hiring to, or you're not just doing a random draw across every employee in County of San Diego. How does that work?
Thank you, Commissioner Inman, for the question. So first of all, the Selection Source Committee members would not be any of the current IRC staff. They would not be voting members. We look at, for example, employees that have experience in the Registrar of Voters, in community engagement, and our data systems, and mapping and drawing. So those would be those sort of people that would be selected for the Selection Source Committee. The reason on option 1 that would not include the IRC members is because the IRC members have fully developed all the criteria that the SSC members would rank. proposals on. So they would be developing the evaluation and how those would be ranked, the statement of work. All of that would be done in the public by the commissioners in option 1, with only the voting of those proposals that come in with the selection source committee.
Okay, thank you. Yep, that's it.
So I now have Vice Chair Diaz, Commissioner Kugliak, then Commissioner Chen.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. And thank you for outlining. I really like how there's 2 different timelines that correspond to each option. I have 2 questions actually, clarifying. When you mentioned in option 2 that there's costs involved, do we have sort of an idea of what those potential costs would be for option 2? And if there's a difference between the 2 options in that respect? And then my other question about option 2 was how to maintain confidentiality of proprietary information, in particular, if we're looking at, if this is going to be a fully public process, let's say, for in the instance of the mapper, right? If there's a particular piece of software or something that's going to be used, how is that kind of information, I guess, would be considered in this sense of business proprietary information? How would that be kept confidential during the review process?
Sure, I'll start, then I'll have Liberty add on. So for the cost, we did note on the slide the potential impacts could include with option 2 a number of additional meetings, because you're not only creating the RFP and everything, you're actually also then scoring them. So you would need, probably, depending on how many proposals come in, at least 4 additional special meetings of maybe 4 to 8 hours each. In addition, it could limit contractors, going to your question, Commissioner Diaz, about those that may not want to go through this process because of that proprietary information. And then because we're having these additional meetings, we would have the translation cost. And then we would also have legal counsel and all that entails. I don't have a figure for you, but I know that if that's the desire of the commissioner, that they like to come back, we can try to estimate it. It's very hard because it's going to depend on how many proposals. It's going to depend on how long it takes to actually write, rank, and do all of that in completely in these meetings. And then Liberty, was there follow-up on the proprietary piece that you want to add on to?
Yes, I think that is a really good question, and we have been already talking about that. At this point, we thought maybe we could potentially, what the state has done, and Rich, if you want to weigh in, you can. They're just going to decide that the contractor could state this is proprietary, and then DPC staff or their equivalent will decide. We thought possibly, and that's why we kind of recommended, is maybe the advisory committee that looks at the cost proposal could also review that. But that was just a sample timeline, a sample suggestion. We would have to kind of weigh in a little bit more, and Rich may have some additional input to provide too.
Yeah, so I don't have much to add to that, but it is one of the complexities we'd have to work our way through. Obviously there's options such as saying don't send us any proprietary information, but obviously then the risk of that is, are we going to get the information that you need to make the right decision, right? So it's just something we will have to work through if that option is picked to come up with a good process to deal with that.
Commissioner Diaz, does that address what you had in mind?
Yeah, sort of. I might have some follow-up questions later.
Okay, good. I've got Commissioner Kugliak, then Commissioner Chen. Did you still want to ask a clarifying question? Okay, Commissioner Kugliak, please.
Thank you. I'm kind of confused from the legal side of everything. So none of this, originally there was, a small subcommittee that participated with some county employees. Now there's everybody in every meeting. And the idea was that it would have to be a non-confidential subcommittee if we did set one up separate from the original process. I mean, from the previous discussion and from the example of the interview committee, it sounds like this is exactly what the Brown Act envisioned ad hoc committees for. So I don't really understand why those seem to be out of the question for this process, because it seems very much like an all or none set of options here. So like everyone's involved in everything, or only a small number are involved, but then not in terms of the decision-making process, which seemed like we were last week. So I'm just a little confused how subcommittees, specifically ad hoc committees, to maintain confidentiality, how that fits in and is either a limitation or not a limitation.
Liberty, do you want us to try and address that? So the Brown Act allowance for ad hoc committees is for advisory subcommittees. And so going and taking a committee that's going to make a decision on the hiring of a contractor or the selection of a contractor into an ad hoc committee wouldn't work with the Brown Act. And so these options were meant to balance that concern, on the one hand, allowing a confidential source selection committee to go and do things out of public that doesn't include IRC commissioners to address the Brown Act consideration there. And on the other hand, doing everything out in public to have more participation, but also ensure the Brown Act compliance. And so that's why they have been structured that way. I think to Liberty's point and to where Barbara started from is that the structuring of the committees was meant to, or the structuring of the options, I'm sorry, was meant to balance these various considerations. The Brown Act consideration, which allows these kind of ad hoc advisory committees only in certain instances, the commissioner's desire for increased participation and participation of more or as many commissioners as possible. And then also the various constraints or considerations, if you will, of the procurement process. And so that's why they were structured that way. But I think as Barbara suggested at the beginning, in terms of an option 2 that is kind of a more wide open option. To your question about what would be an appropriate participation of an ad hoc committee, that is the example that we gave, that it might be appropriate to convene an ad hoc committee to go back and discuss questions or additional considerations on how to structure that option 2 process.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm just not really understanding, it seems like if we were to treat this like the interview process, that it almost seems like an ad hoc committee could kind of follow what we talked about last time, that type of process, but then not make any decisions. In fact, go through all the confidential information as an advisory committee, come back, and then the decision be made by the whole IRC. So it is in fact a fair ad hoc advisory committee, but still maintains and I apologize if this is different. I really am just trying to understand where ad hoc fits in, because I just personally, the idea of 14 people working on an RFP document sounds like it's going to take way more than 2 hours across 2 meetings. So I'm just trying to understand specifically why ad hoc doesn't fit in any way, shape, or form in either of these 2 options, aside from the limited example that you gave.
So I think, and I apologize, I understand your question better now. It's not that it doesn't fit in at all. The options were structured this way to kind of give maximum IRC participation in various aspects of the process. But if the IRC wanted to advise staff to go back and kind of look at possibly structuring a different 3rd option that had more limited IRC participation in the form of an ad hoc committee that would complete certain tasks, that would certainly be something that would be on the table. It's not that the participation isn't appropriate, it's just that staff was trying to balance those competing considerations and kind of take all of that feedback into account when structuring the options.
Okay, I understand now. Thank you.
Thanks for that. So let me go to Commissioner Chen. Commissioner Garcia. Vice Chair Diaz, is that a hand just left up, or did you have something you wanted to ask at this point? Okay, so Commissioner Chen.
So in this process then, after the public day, we have their feedback and we have feedback from a bunch of competitors who will have self-interested feedback. How is that feedback incorporated into the RFP in both these processes?
Commissioner Chen, this is Barbara. So on the, to get everyone started, the commissioners would be provided with a very draft statement of work. And then what we would do is start creating the RFP or showing the RFP. Industry Day would allow the opportunity for the community to go ahead and provide that feedback. Staff would come back and incorporate that feedback in based on commission direction. And then we would post the statement of work. Did I miss any steps, Liberty?
No, and we would also be, when we came to the actual decision making, when we met with the IRC again, we would have all of that draft up, and then you guys could go and agree or not agree. We would, staff would come back with a process to make it as efficient as possible. Staff would also review if there's any comments or feedback that is not allowed by law or anything like that, and DPC will also weigh in on any of those feedbacks. But the plan is to incorporate all the feedback and then bring it to another commission meeting.
Okay, so that's different than what Barbara said. Barbara said the IRC's inputs would drive the change in the RFP. You're saying no, staff would incorporate the feedback and then show it to the commission.
So just in the draft document, we would take your feedback, because eventually all of the commissioners will probably send us feedback at a meeting, like give us the feedback, written feedback. Some of the feedback would be written. And then, so on the, I guess I'm not explaining this really well. So let me just try to revise. On the January 28th meeting, the commission would send any revised drafts or recommendations to staff. And then staff would take all of that, would also take Industry Day information. And then at the February 11th meeting, staff will present edits to both of the RFPs. And then the commission will spend some time reviewing all of the edits in one combined.
So still not clear. So after Industry Day, is the IRC expected to review all the public comments and incorporate that into the RFP, or does staff do that?
We can do that, but we could also send that to the commission so they could review it if they would like to see it separately.
I think just to clarify, if staff are incorporated anything into the RFP, it is based on the commission direction, which ideally would have been at the commission meetings based on public input.
That sounds nice. In reality, I think that just sounds like a huge nightmare trying to get an RFP done this way. I just cannot see this being workable at all.
This again, this is in response to the feedback that we received at the December 18th meeting, where
you're teaching us
as possible, and so
you're teaching us a lesson. You're teaching us a lesson for asking. Okay, I mean, I guess I understand why you guys proposed this. Again, if you've ever done an RFP, just trying to really visualize how this would work, it won't. We won't get anything done for a long time. So those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Garcia.
Thanks. Well, first of all, I want to say that the two options as presented, I thought were done remarkably well and very clearly. And so I appreciate that. And thank you for that. The first comment I had after having read through them was I was a little bit puzzled because I didn't see an option to tweak what you proposed to us last time, because and what I wrote here in my notes is, oh, there's not an option here to increase participation of the IRC in the original proposal. And I thought that was what one of the concerns was. There were only 2 people, well, actually 3, for a grand total of 6 IRC commissioners that were going to participate at all in the previous process. So I guess I'm a little, I was similarly confused as Commissioner Krugliak. And while I think that these two options have a lot to recommend them, and I think the industry day, I'm not sure, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think that is a nice addition because it provides for the public to provide some input. It does seem very unwieldy, the two options that we're looking at. So I'm reluctant and I hesitate to sort of say that maybe we need to continue looking at another option, but I was a little bit surprised that we didn't sort of address some of the concerns that we had, or maybe this isn't over addressing. I think maybe I appreciate the staff's clear desire to respond to our concerns. But I would suggest that we could go back to that first option and consider that increasing participation, looking at the technical advisor. That was one of the other things, how that technical advisor was going to be selected. And I guess maybe a legal question is there a reason that we had to be in that original option, why we had to stick with just a grand total of 3, but only 2 voting members on that committee? And is there not an option to expand that to a bigger number?
Well, I'm going to actually ask council to weigh in this because it's going back to the last meeting. So Marguerite or Hillary, are either of you available to weigh in on this?
Yeah, we can address that. We have provided the commissioners with some background, some confidential legal advice, which is confidential, and if the commission needs kind of more information about the extent to which that can be discussed, we can follow up on that advice. But I think the short answer, which we can provide here, is that we have structured the options brought back before the commission, not just to be responsive to the commissioners, as Barbara and Liberty have talked about, and as the commissioners have observed, but also to ensure full compliance with the Brown Act. And so, that limits in certain ways the options that we are able to present to the commissioners. And so we have been, Barbara said at the outset, everyone spent a lot of time working collaboratively behind the scenes to make sure that we were addressing all of those competing, not necessarily competing, but a multitude of considerations that are relevant to this process in a way that is responsive, but also kind of addresses best practices with respect to procurement and the Brown Act and everything else.
Thank you.
Commissioner Inman, then Commissioner Russ, I'm sorry.
So to go back to the formation of the what is it, SSC, this whatever it is, if we were to change that so it's an advisory committee that reviews the information, rank orders the selections, and makes a recommendation to the full IRC on a rank ordering of candidates, is that okay then?
So Hillary, correct me if I'm wrong, but because it's an ad hoc committee, you would not be able to make the selection. And so this is what we're having some difficulty last time. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking we're not selecting, we're recommending. I don't know if that's too fine a line, but that's what I'm saying is they're not selecting, they're recommending.
Yeah, I think it would be, so if the commissioners want to consider a different process than the ones that than the two options we presented today, I think the best course of action would be for staff to take that feedback and for us to come up with a recommendation as to the best way to structure that to, as you say, not, to make sure everyone's clear where that line is in terms of making sure that everything is kept advisory and that we are doing it in a way that best serves the procurement council and any concerns that DBC may have as well.
Commissioner Inman, was that all you wanted to ask yet for now? Okay, good. So Commissioner Russ, then Commissioner Pons.
Yeah, I just have a real quick question. Option 1 seems to be your current standard operating procedure with the addition of this industry day. Am I correct?
Slightly, Commissioner. So what's a little bit different is we would be creating the RFP during 3 very public meetings. An option could be sharing a draft statement of work and then bringing that forward as an industry day where the public can weigh in, and then going back and doing posting the RFP based on that. That could be, and Liberty, correct me if I'm wrong, or if I'm doing anything outside of the DPC lines, but that could be one option: sharing the draft statement of work. And then being able to have a public industry day, a public opportunity, which we do. We don't do it all the time, but we can have the industry day so that the community can weigh in. And then we would finalize the statement of work and post that for procurement.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Pons.
Yes, if I recall, I think what got us here is because we wanted to restore confidence in the process and make sure that was transparent. And it sounds like we made this sort of complicated in your response to our questions, especially based on Commissioner Chen's comments. So I guess I read the legal analysis, and you talked about all of the potential risk. And at the end, you talked about a potential liability in the court of public opinion, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess I'm ready to move on to make a recommendation that we stand up maybe an ad hoc committee to work with the staff to determine a way forward to present back to the IRC with an advisory capacity of the way forward.
Okay, we'll take that under advisement after public comment, but thank you for that. Commissioner Chen.
My comment was actually a lot like Commissioner Pons, which is that I would like to see us perhaps design a process, which is we have a statement of work designed by staff, we have public input on the statement of work, and then we have an advisory committee staffed by several IRC members, review that, make a recommendation, so not make any decisions, and then have the IRC full vote on it based on the recommendation from the advisory committee. If we can turn that into a proposal or a motion, I'd like to do so.
Yeah, I don't want to entertain that until we get to public comment. We're technically still in clarifying questions, if that's okay.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you for saying it. That's good. Are there any more clarifying questions? Good. Andrew, do we have any requests for public input?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have 3 requests to speak on this item. So I will first call forward Janine Arakat. And Janine, you'll have, as well as all the other speakers, have 3 minutes to address the commission.
Okay, thank you. Hello again. This is Janine Arakat. I promise this is the last time you'll hear my voice today. First, I wanted to thank you all for today's thoughtful discussion and just uplifting public comment all throughout this session. I really appreciate that. I also really appreciate the commission's discussion at its last meeting and the work that staff put into developing the post-recruitment processes that put the control over development of the RFPs and the selection of the consultants in the hands of the commission. We urge you to adopt option 2, which will provide the most transparency and opportunity for public input and is more consistent with the way that other independent commissions conduct their hiring of chief consultants. In addition, and importantly, we urge you to have separate RFPs or applications for the demographer and the line drawer. These are two very distinct skill sets, and while some line drawers may have both, not all do, and combining them into one RFP will limit the pool of applicants and may preclude you from getting the best possible consultants. I thank you all for your time, and I look forward to hearing the rest of this meeting and attending the meeting in 2 weeks. So thank you all again.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Kim Knox.
Hello again, I'm Kim Knox on behalf of the League of Women Voters of San Diego. I'd like to echo what she said about urging you to adopt option 2 as it provides the most transparency and opportunity for public input. And also urging you to have separate RFPs or applications for the demographer and the line drawer. As she stated, these are very distinct skill sets, and some line drawers may have both, but not all do. Combining them into one RFP will limit the pool of applicants. Thank you.
Thank you. We also had a request from Yasmin Obeid. I saw her logged in just a moment ago, but it looks like she has left the meeting. If she does come back, Mr. Chair, I'll let you know that she does come back. But at this point, that concludes public comment on this item.
Okay. Thank you for that. To have a discussion on this, we really should have a motion. To have a motion, we really should make it, under standard process at least, a yes or no vote on one of the two options. I don't have a good sense right now of how the commission would like to proceed on that, other than I didn't hear a lot for that kind of discussion right now. With your indulgence, I'll ask for just a couple of general comments because I see some hands raised. Vice Chair Diaz and Commissioner Chen, did you want to say something? Okay, Vice Chair Diaz, and then Commissioner Ross.
Okay. I actually have some more, I have specific questions. So I don't know if we do put a motion on the table, I don't know if I could speak to that motion until I get these questions answered.
Understood. Let me keep mulling this over and entertain comments from Commissioner Russ, please.
Yeah, I think that option 1 is probably the cleanest, and with that addition of that industry day, it gives the transparency that our speakers were just addressing. The other is combining the demographer and the line drawers. They really are inseparable, quite frankly, and I don't see where that's really going to be problematic to have them in the same RFP. I see it much more problematic to have them in separate RFPs.
Okay. What I'm hearing there is the beginning of a motion to approve option 1. But before I do that, let me see if there is a motion to do something more like a tasking to staff for redevelopment or change. I'm happy to do it either way, and it's not really going to result in a different discussion, but I'd prefer to keep it focused on one particular motion.
My only thought, Chair Bain, if I may, is that, you know, all the commissioners received some legal advice, and I just want to ensure, and I want to make sure that whichever option we go with today, there's, you know, we fully thought through the legal implications. And so I want to, if anything, if we can direct staff, and I don't want to hold up the process either by doing this, but I just would like some more clarification and follow up on what was provided to us.
Okay, and I think that'll be part of the conversation regardless. Commissioner Krugliak.
Thank you. I would maybe perhaps have a slightly different motion than just an action to staff, but perhaps this is a nice place for a small ad hoc committee between now and our next meeting to get together, work with staff, work with our legal counsel to come up with maybe a third proposal that is more in line with, I think, what we were expecting based on last time's discussion, and maybe have a vote on that, perhaps incorporating something like Industry Day as a potential third alternative next week, or in 2 weeks.
Andrew, I saw Ms. Obeid just came
Thank you.
back.
Yes.
Let me ask commissioners to think about what you just heard, as well as listen carefully to Ms. Obeid. And when we come back, we'll try to figure out which motion we'll take up. So Andrew, please.
Thank you. Yasmin Obeid, you may address the commission. You'll have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I lost connection shortly. Again, my name is Yasmin Abed and I'm with the Majdal Center and Arab Resource Center in Al Cajon. And I'm here really to, again, reiterate what my other colleagues already mentioned. I really want to urge us to adopt option 2 that will provide the most transparency and opportunity for public input. And also, most importantly, urge us to have separate RFPs or applications in order for the demographer and the line drawer. Those are 2 very distinct skill sets. And while some line drawers might have both, not all do. So making sure that we separate the application and ensure that we have 2 very qualified people to do 2 different skill sets is important. So we urge you to do that, please. And again, thank you all for your time and for taking the time to listen to all of us and really take our input into consideration. I appreciate taking the language piece into consideration a lot and look forward to continue working together. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes public comment on this item.
Very good. Thank you for that. For my part, in terms of the process, and Commissioner Russ, I'll ask you in particular if this is okay. I think it may be easier to take up a motion from Commissioner Krugliak or one of the earlier speakers to form an ad hoc committee to discuss this, because it would be easier to incorporate discussions of option 1 and 2 into that discussion than having a motion to approve option 1 and try to fold in something that's not quite defined.
I think you're right on. I think her recommendation was very good. And I would like to be part of that ad hoc committee.
Good. So first, Commissioner Kuliak, would you like to state the motion you want to put on the table? I don't mean to put you on the spot. There are several others who can do it.
Sure. I'm very happy to. I would motion that we form an ad hoc subcommittee to meet and present as an actionable agenda item at our next meeting, a third recommendation regarding the RFP process.
Thank you for that motion. Before I ask for a second, let me just clarify. Your intent there would be for the action item to be considered as a third option, meaning that option 1 and option 2 presently before us would still be under consideration?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a second for the motion by Commissioner Kuglia? Commissioner Larson, thank you. All right. So this may go faster than than anticipated. We'll see. Comments, please, on the motion. Commissioner Serban.
So what I heard was that this motion is to stand up a committee that would consider the process by which we would do the RFP, like option 1, option 2. What I'd like to know is there's been significant amount of public comment that suggests that we ought to consider also separating one of the RFPs that we're currently considering into two separate RFPs. Would that question also come within the scope of this commission or committee that we're creating, or maybe that, or should we maybe just have a discussion about that separately right now?
I think we can certainly have that as part of this discussion, but I don't want to confuse things. I do want to clarify, and staff and council, correct me if I'm wrong, that the maximum number we could have on this kind of ad hoc committee would be maybe 6, but an odd number might be better.
7.
Barbara, Hillary, Liberty.
Yeah, that's right. It's less than a quorum, which there's a little bit of oddity with the way the IRC is structured, where a quorum is more than a majority. You know, for simplicity's sake, typically you would have less than a majority, and with an odd number, given the makeup of the IRC. You know, you could have 7. 5 might be a more workable number. You know, usually with the ad hoc committees, you see them smaller, around 3, sometimes 5. But that's the legal rule is less than a quorum.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Inman and Commissioner Larson, did you have your hand up earlier? No. Okay, so Commissioner Inman for now, and then Commissioner Hanson.
The first, I think there's 2 separate issues. One is the process, and that applies to any RFP. And so I think that's what this committee should be focused on, is the process. We can then also discuss what goes into the RFP. Is it a demographer / line drawer? Is it a demographer and a separate one for a line drawer? But I see that as outside the scope of what we're talking about right now. So that's my interpretation. Just a clarifying point from, I know that I had talked about separating a demographer from something last time. I didn't understand whether it was the other. Now, what I meant by that was not a line drawer demographer, separating those two. What I meant was software commissioners would use to draw maps, which is different from the software a demographer would use. It's like, you know, it's much more sophisticated, does a lot of stuff, you know, has all the bells and whistles. We're not going to need that kind of software for our use. And so maybe that's, you know, discussion of an RFP down the road is what kind of, you know, Excel friendly software would commissioners as well as maybe the public have access to do scenarios, things like that. So that's it.
Commissioner Hanson, I promise to come to you in a minute. Where I think we may be headed is, regardless of forming the ad hoc committee, a tasking to staff, which may or may not require separate motion, to look at that specific issue about what's involved in having 1 or 2 RFPs on demographer and line drawing. So I agree, it's a separate issue. It may be useful to get that ahead of our next meeting, not to overtax staff, but I think it's a missing piece, and I'd be similarly cautious for process reasons, not to overload that ad hoc committee whose real mission under the current motion proposed is to develop option 3, for lack of a better term. Commissioner Hanson.
It's very common practice when you are applying for a grant or a contract, that if you cannot provide for all items on the statement of work within house, that you have as part of your proposal that you will hire an outside consultant. I mean, that is very common, and that encourages, I mean, that should be in the RFP. That's why we need to see this RFP and make sure that things like that are included. It doesn't have to be a separate contract, but it can be a subcontract, and it often is.
And that brings up, I think, a relative factor for this ad hoc committee we're talking about. Regardless of how many commissioners on it, Barbara, Liberty, Hillary, I want to just make absolutely sure, individual commissioners could still send thoughts, comments, suggestions, watch out for items to staff, so that they would be considered in that ad hoc subcommittee, even if that particular commissioner wasn't there. Is that correct?
That's a little bit of it's going to depend on how it happens, but the Brown Act, it does prohibit hub and spoke type meetings.
Right.
So if you have commissioners that are forwarding information to staff, that's then going to communicate that information back to other commissioners, and that results in a majority of the commission
Right.
having that information, then that would not be permissible under the Brown Act. And so, you know, the idea with the subcommittee is it's really limited to less than a quorum or less than a majority of the IRC engaging in that discussion. And so the full IRC would not have the benefit of participating in those conversations, you know, either at the subcommittee meeting or through staff as an intermediary.
So when option 3 came back, quote unquote, it would come back in that form and only represent the input from those people.
That's right. Yeah. So it would represent their kind of smaller group thinking and then be presented to in public at a publicly noticed meeting, at a normal meeting of the IRC for discussion by the full IRC to, you know, then approve an option or kind of send it back with that feedback that's been communicated in public.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that clarification. That's helpful. All right. Other comments? Seeing Commissioner Inman.
Was there a proposal made about how people would get on this ad hoc committee, or are we going to just submit your name to staff? Staff does a random drawing, 3 people get on it. I don't know how we staff there.
I think for, again, I'll ask staff, council, and other commissioners for comment, but I would imagine it would be something like we discussed earlier. We do need to set a number, I think, as part of the motion. And I'd ask Commissioner Kugliak first because of her motion, but if there needs to be an amendment made, I'm certain other commissioners could weigh in. Hillary in particular, is that right? If we define the number and then allow commissioners would send their names in, I'd like to be on the subcommittee, and staff would hold a random drawing and notify commissioners involved?
If the commission desires to do it that way, that would be fine, but you can also choose the commissioners to participate now in the context of that discussion, because it's going to be an advisory committee only that is made up solely of members of the IRC. The IRC can have a discussion now about how the membership of that advisory subcommittee is to be constituted.
So from a process point of view, I'd much rather we get that done now because it saves time, but Commissioner Kugliak, it is your motion. I will abide by whichever way you'd like to go.
Sure. I can't see everybody anymore because I've moved to my phone, but I cannot imagine that only 5 people or fewer would like to be on this subcommittee. So I will amend my motion to say that it will be a subcommittee of 5. Anyone who does not want to be on it can let staff know, and of all of the remaining names, it will be a random drawing.
Is that okay with our seconder? Very good. Andrew, does that meet the requirements for the motion to remain on the floor?
It does. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So with that in mind, any closing comments before we vote on that motion?
I have a comment.
Please.
I mean, is it possible for us to maybe come to a consensus as to who the 5 members of this commission would be before right now?
Not the motion.
Well, given what council just said, if Commissioner Kugliak is willing, I would be willing to just take a show of hands on how many might be interested.
Of course, I'm willing to do that. I will have to raise my hand by phone.
Right. So for those visible, please raise your, this is just an indication. For those who would be interested and would want to be considered for or want to be on it, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, wait a minute, my screen's changing as we speak. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Commissioner Serban? No, okay. The way I'm looking at it, I see 5.
Christina Kubliak said she wanted to be on it too. Yeah, she was raising her hand.
Yeah, I'm raising my hand virtually.
I'd like to amend the motion to make it a 6-member commission.
Commissioner Kugliak?
If there's exactly 6 and we can save some time and just make it these 6, I'm thrilled.
I happily amend the motion to a 6-member subcommittee and take away my motion about a random drawing.
And therefore, I will hold each and every one of you accountable to not get stuck on a 3-on-3 vote and bring it back to us. But in all honesty, it's your ad hoc committee, so that's great. So Andrew, did you get those names, or do we need to read them out?
I do. Let me just clarify for the record. So the motion on the floor by Commissioner Krugliak, seconded by Commissioner Larson, is to form an ad hoc subcommittee of 6 commissioners to meet and present at the next meeting about a 3rd recommendation regarding the RFP process. That ad hoc committee consists of Commissioner Russ, Larson, Brown, Hansen, Inman, and Krugliak. Did I miss anybody?
Does everyone understand that and agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Krugliak, did you want to say something, or is that just a hand up?
Oh, sorry, I'll lower it.
It's okay. Just want to be inclusive. Good. All right, so that is the motion on the floor. Any final comments? Okay. Commissioner Garcia, I haven't forgotten an earlier comment, but if you're okay, we'll just proceed as we have before. Good. Mr. Potter, could you call the vote, please?
Thank you. Happy to. Chair Boehm?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Katarina?
Aye.
Commissioner Chen?
Aye.
Vice Chair Diaz?
Aye.
Commissioner Garcia?
Aye.
Commissioner Hansen?
Aye.
Commissioner Inman?
Aye.
Commissioner Krugliak?
Aye.
Commissioner Larson?
Aye.
Commissioner Pons?
Aye.
Commissioner Russ?
Aye.
Commissioner Serban?
Aye.
That motion passes unanimously with all commissioners who are present voting aye, and noting for the record that Commissioner Dostal is absent.
Very good. Thank you all for that. Much appreciated. Before we move on to the final agenda item, I just want to make sure with regard to the mapping demographer RFP question, we have a tasking to staff on that. Is there any comment or required motion on that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please, Chair?
Yeah, that's all right. During the discussion, Commissioner Inman and others made comments about whether we need 1 or 2 RFPs with regard to mapping. The idea being that mapping and demography, if I understood it right, could be seen as 2 separate functions and might have effects on the pool of applicants, as we heard from the public comments. What I'm saying is, and if we need a formal motion on this, Andrew or others, please let me know, but I will consider that as part of the discussion that staff will follow up on and come back to us on the 28th.
Chair Boehm, we did note that in the staff report, and Marguerite, if you would mind also mentioning that. You're on mute.
Yes, I wanted to make sure, thank you, Barbara. I wanted to make sure that I understood, I want to make sure that we answered this, all of the questions about it. And I would, if Commissioner Inman would indulge us and explain his comment again. It seemed like it was more a question about the resources available to the commission versus the resources that our contractor would use. But I don't have my hands around that question. And if Commissioner Inman could address it in more detail, that'd be helpful.
No, that's exactly what the issue was. When I read the RFP, it said mapping software. And I didn't see where it talked about the fact that it's the person that draws the lines. So that's different. That's not mapping software. That's somebody using mapping software to
Right.
draw lines. I took mapping software to be software like an online web portal where you hit Google Earth, and you're able to throw up a bunch of data and see what it looks like. That's what commissioners will need in order to visualize these boundaries that we're going to draw. So I'm not saying that we need a separate line drawer from a demographer. I don't think we do. I don't think those functions really are separate functions. But there's a need for mapping software that commissioners would use as non-demographers and mappers, if you will.
Yes, and there are those resources out there, and we will address those in responding to this question. Absolutely, I understand you now.
Okay, thank you.
And thank
I
you.
would just ask that this be part also of what amounts to staff providing feedback on the public comment we received as well. So it's a holistic answer about the line drawing and demography and software questions. Okay.
Chair, could you repeat those names that are on the ad hoc committee again, please?
Sure. Andrew, do you want to do that for the record?
Be happy to do that. That was in no particular order. Commissioner Russ, Commissioner Larson, Commissioner Brown, Commissioner Hanson, Commissioner Inman, and Commissioner Krugliak.
Now, as I understand it, since it's ad hoc, we can communicate amongst ourselves in a non-public forum. Is that correct? And we could email, we could email each other, and we could have our own Zoom meeting, et cetera. Okay.
Yes.
That's right. And just to reiterate the comment to in response to Chair Boehm's question, just keep those discussions within the ad hoc advisory committee,
Right.
you know, and not involve other commissioners either directly or via an intermediary source.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
May I ask a question? I apologize. And Hillary, maybe you can help on this. One of the maybe what's been a little bit fuzzy is why staff haven't been able to come up with a proposal that the commission can move forward. And I think that the challenging part, and I'm just sharing this with the ad hoc committee to keep in mind, is we have some restrictions around the county procurement process. So I just want to make sure that we can support you with that information as you're having your conversations in the best way possible. We also have been consulting very closely with legal counsel regarding confidentiality around the SSCs and things of that nature. So that's been, I think, the challenging part for staff. And I just want to make sure that, or offer up our experience, because as the ad hoc moves forward, I wouldn't want you to get too far ahead and then there not be an ability to proceed because of those limitations. Does that make sense? Is that, okay?
Yeah.
Good. Vice Chair Diaz.
Thank you. I maybe this might already be covered by the ad hoc committee, but I know staff had made a recommendation here about the issue of translation services and small and minority owned businesses. So I want to revisit that. I don't know if that's something that the ad hoc committee is now tasked with, or if that is also part of the public discussion that we're having now.
If I'm reading this right, in the paper that was provided to us,
Yes.
with regard to both issues, actually, there was anticipation that there would be future presentations on it. And in particular, in the case of the subcontractors, it would be related to the RFP discussion. Because we're not going to be discussing the RFP quite yet, because we have to consider option 3, I think that still applies, and we will be hearing about both those issues as we work through it. I would certainly encourage and invite the ad hoc committee to consider those issues as they develop option 3. But Vice Chair Diaz, to answer your question, I think it'll still be on the table and something we'll need to address and discuss as we move forward in the process. Barbara, Hillary, Liberty, is that correct?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay. Very good. So we move on to item 10, future agenda items.
Sorry,
Chairman, may I ask how the committee will be convened?
Barbara, are you the right address on that to explain that, or?
How the ad hoc committee would be convened?
So now that we've identified the commissioners, you all would need to determine how you would like to meet and communicate. and schedule your call, whatever it is. If you would like staff support in terms of at some point regarding and we can weave in legal counsel or DPC, we're happy to do that at that point.
Okay.
So we would not, you have the group of the folks. Go ahead, Hillary.
Yeah, and part of the consideration with an ad hoc advisory committee is it is ad hoc. There is no adoption of a formal meeting schedule. There is no formal, procedures, and so that is the commissioners, would work together to find a time that they can have these discussions. And as Barbara said, the team is available to provide support and information, but it does not follow the same formalities. Just, that's the very nature of the ad hoc committee, is it's not going to follow the same formalities as the IRC's general meetings or as a standing subcommittee would.
And I don't want to get into too deep a conversation in this forum about that because, as Hillary just stated, it belongs to the ad hoc committee, but I do see Commissioner Krugliak signed up. Please.
I don't think I have any. I'm happy to send out an email, but I don't think I have any other commissioners' email by design. Is it possible for staff just to maybe CC all of us so that we can email each other and then we can take it from there?
Were you going to say something, Hillary?
Nope. There's certainly no, legal Brown Act concern with staff distributing those email addresses to the extent you don't have them already. So Barbara and her team can facilitate that.
Okay. Very good.
So, Chair Bain?
Please, Commissioner Serban.
So is my understanding correct that then staff will report back on the matter of the RFP being a separate RFP for the demographer and the line drawer?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So with regard to future agenda items, as established in item 6, we have our next meeting on January 28th. I think I said we would start that at 5:30. Andrew, is that?
That is correct. Yes.
Correct. So that's our current plan. This is an opportunity, though, for commissioners to discuss any items to be considered for the next meeting. I think several of them have already been identified. But let me ask first if we have any topics. Well, first, let me just make absolutely sure. Does anyone need topics repeated or anything like that? And simultaneously, I'll ask Andrew if there are any requests for public input on this.
There are no requests to speak on this item.
Good. We'll just move into discussion then. Are there suggestions for future agenda items above and beyond what we've already discussed? And well, let me ask that first. Commissioner Serban.
So just carrying something forward from a prior meeting that Commissioner Garcia, I think, had brought up, which was the idea of organizing some sort of team building activity. So hopefully, I think maybe I thought there was some support in the commission to maybe ask staff to look into what maybe opportunities there might be for that. Secondly, I'm a little troubled maybe by the public comments that we received that were misdirected. It maybe to me demonstrates that we ought to get ahead of our messaging or our public outreach. The RFP being, the public outreach RFP I saw the earliest in our timeline is going to be finalized April 27th. We can't, that can't be when we begin explaining to people what we're doing and how to interact with us. I'd like to have a discussion about how to begin doing some kind of preliminary outreach, or at least let people know, what it is we're doing, why we're different from the city of San Diego, and, give us the relevant comments that we're looking for.
Would an agenda item along the lines of near-term outreach be satisfactory on that?
That sounds good to me. I'm of course love to hear what my fellow commissioners think of that.
I'm saying that because I'd like to have something in particular that allows us to start discussing the website a little bit, hear staff ideas about it, and things that we might want posted on there sooner rather than later. I defer to staff and of course the commissioners on exact wording, but I think something short that allows us to have a broad discussion is good.
That sounds good.
I definitely saw another hand or two. Commissioner Pons?
Say yes.
Yes, I just want to move a comment I made in the first meeting about public safety and security when we start meeting actually in public spaces. And I just want to make sure that that's a topic of discussion and consideration going forward. And so I'm going to bring it up again from the first meeting. I am concerned about it. I'm even more concerned today. And I think that should be a topic of discussion.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Commissioner Krugliak, and I'm sorry, Commissioner Brown, then Commissioner Krugliak.
I think we ought to get a little bit more heads up on our legal ramifications from if we don't do things the way we're supposed to be doing them, not just with the Brown Act, but with other types of things. So our exposure, I guess, to lawsuits and what kind of lawsuits have come up with other commissions in the past, and what do we need to be ahead of so that we don't end up in a lawsuit as individuals. Or
I'll ask staff to consider whether that's a training session or an agenda item, if that's okay with you, Commissioner Brown, at this point. But either way, understood. Commissioner Krugliak?
I think if we could just bring up the quick items of revisiting the discussion of a rotating chair from a few weeks back, which I think we have to deal with by February, and then also the potential options for random order voting, if we could discuss both of those next time.
And again, I'll ask staff to consider whether there's an item on procedure or those are separated into subtopics, however best carries the conversation forward, but thank you for that. We did talk previously, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Diaz?
I was just going to suggest, and I don't know if this would be appropriate to even have, now that we've already formed an ad hoc committee, if we want to revisit the idea of subcommittees or actually form a subcommittee at our next meeting, and it might be premature to do, but we have a lot of training that we have to do, and in particular, I'm concerned about, I think you might be about to bring this up the budget. So I'm not sure if there's two separate items that need to be separated out, but maybe a potential action item at our next meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Krugliak?
Sorry, didn't lower my hand.
Nope, my fault. Yeah, and a budget was an item we discussed before, and I think there had been a kind of tentative plan that I think Nicole, correct, was going to brief on that. So we'll certainly take that into consideration. Commissioner Serban?
I'd like to discuss our email retention policy.
Okay, great. Any other items for consideration? Very good. So staff, I'm sure, is taking note of all that. We'll see what seems the best way to put things together, especially given the other work that we're facing, and we'll be in touch. And just to reassure, if there's a way to get it out earlier, I'm sure staff will find a way to do that. Okay. Any other comments on that before we move to item 11 and adjourn?
Mr. Chair, this is Andrew. I just want to remind commissioners that have not completed their AB 1234 ethics training to please do so as soon as possible, just to get that out of the way, because you've got lots of other training coming your way. So you can take the time to complete that 2-hour training and get those certificates over to us. We'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Terrific. And everyone should have access to it and can certainly reach out to staff if they need to dig it up again or we're having any problems. Good. Thank you for the reminder. With that, we move to item 11, adjournment at 5:48 p.m. This concludes our business for today. Thank you very, very much. We'll see you at the 28th at 5:30. and please be in touch with staff as needed. Thank you.
Thank you.
You.